Hello, everyone. Ciantier here with my Guild Wars 1 stream. Today is a bit of a special stream. It's a little bit of a test drive of a concept because it's a couple of things today. First, it's my birthday, and last year for my birthday, I started the Guild Wars Slow Playthrough series. Slow Playthrough, it became Lore Playthrough partway through when I sort of, transitioned topics a little bit or concepts a little bit and was no longer employing as many of the, slow aspects in terms of some of the restrictions. But also I thought lore maybe played better. I don't know. But it's the anniversary of the start of that as well. And what I thought I might do for today is I wrote up a whole thing in notes. There's several pages. What is this? There's 4 sheets of paper here, in front and back. It covers the first 3 and halfway onto the front face of the fourth page. So something like 6.5 pages or so of notes here. Not shorthand; they're written out. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to just discuss them. What are things that I observed from the playthrough, and what are things I learned from it? This is something that I've been thinking about making an article out of, but I'm terrible at actually making time to write articles. So hey, let's do it live. And this is something that may or will help set the framework for doing more sort of analytic type of videos or analysis type videos going forward. The idea that's kind of crossed my mind a little bit. Somebody mentioned because I have a series of videos from back when I was doing other type of stuff on my YouTube channel. Let's just go ahead and leave this party. I have a series I did as a retrospective on Dark Souls 2. Somebody is saying, hey, I'd like to see you do that for 1 and 3. Hey, Clean Star. Good to see you. And, that would be cool. But I don't really have time for doing that sort of video these days. So, I feel like chilling in Serenity Temple today. How about I do streams where I do that sort of thing? And you know what? Today will be a little bit of a test run of the concept. Let's see. Where's the Duena statue? If we get favor... There it is. If we get favor in the middle of this conversation, Duena is by far the most interesting and dramatic one. I actually have a clip on my YouTube channel of this particular statue getting favor. Let's just do a random screenshot here. So, like I said, got my notes. And I guess we'll just go through them, won't we? So this is organized by category, I guess. Starting with prophecies, going into factions, then Nightfall, Eye of the North, Guild Wars Beyond, separated into War and Cry, Winds of Change, Hearts of the North, and then some general thoughts. So I'm going to discuss these. Some of these are going to be more broadly applicable. Some of them are going to be more specific to Guild Wars itself, or to something that's doing stuff like Guild Wars. The other thing to note is that this is going to be these notes are in not necessarily any particular order. To some extent, chronology as things come up, but things that are relevant to all of Guild Wars that I first noted in, say, prophecies are going to be in the prophecies section. So that's just kind of how things are organized in these notes. So my first bullet point was make sure background elements don't weaken or otherwise undermine foreground elements. For example, the way religion is used in the main narrative of prophecies is interesting and relatively strong. 5 gods, the unseen, the great dwarf, the mists, the hall of heroes, and so forth. However, some of the dialogue of NPCs, such as Mirik and Alicia, are so generic, second-hand Christianese that it dilutes the main religious elements. This is actually a point on something that matters quite a lot to me, and that is religion in world building. So as a religious person, I'm a Christian, I understand how I'm interacting with my faith. I feel like there's a lot of people, when they're making religions for fictional worlds, are not necessarily people who have spent a lot of time as an actual person of religion. This is just kind of an impression that I have, and I don't know how accurate it is. But the point that I'm getting at is I feel like as a result, they grab tropes from religion that they're used to. And so, for example, in a lot of the Western civilization, this is going to be a lot of Christian concepts, Christian equivalent religion does well is the Eberron setting of D&D. Yeah, because like a lot of the Western world has been heavily influenced by Christianity through like a huge swath of its existence. So that heavily, also welcome Topat, that heavily like influences sort of the way that people think of and conceive religion. Whereas if you look at Japanese games, they're obviously heavily influenced by Buddhism and Shintoism. So, what you run into is you have some of these like religious tropes. So this is referring to specifically, like actually this is a good moment to hop somewhere else. If you go to the Frontier Gate, here's Mirak the Shouter. He says, though he be doomed, his is the only way to salvation, so saith the prophecy. What is salvation? Like, this is something that you hear Christians talk about a lot. They have an idea of what salvation is. But what is salvation in this context? Well, presumably it's escaping into Kryta, maybe? But he also has this line, repent sinners, the prophecy is spoken, the time is near when you shall reap what you have sown, repent. This is super, like, just generic, like, street preacher, Christian street preacher sort of language. Repent from what? Repenting is the action of turning away from something to something. What is the sort of sinners aspect he's talking about? What is the sins of Ascalon, the Ascalonians that they need to turn from? Like, what is it that they've sown that they're reaping? Like, there's no religious context for what's going on here. So this is like just kind of my first point of like, and it's not just religion, but religion is an area where this is really noticeable in Guild Wars, where there's some just very generic, like, religious type language using kind of cultural concepts. Let's see. Skilled at healing arts. As part of my training, become a high priestess. Those require that offer my service. I feel like, yeah, but like it needs to be understood like how in the context of guild. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, sin is one of those other concepts that is unfortunately really often ill-defined. Like, what does it mean to be a sinner in the context of the Guild Wars 1 religion? Because like inherently what sin is it's I mean it's can be like missing the mark as like the initial like term getting translated into. But like in the context of this game, in the context of like what do the gods of the Tyrians, Balthazar, Dwayna, Melandru, Lissa, and Grenth, how do they define sin? Yeah, no, it's inevitable. And we can go really, really deep on this, but my main point here is that, like, things that are supposed to be, like, background elements, like Mirak running around, he's just supposed to be a background element in this section. And, like, he's being treated that way. He's got fairly generic religious style language, according to what I assume ArenaNet's sort of internalized from culture without really thinking about the cohesion of the what the religion, like what the religious expression is in this context, and as a result, like it kind of actually works as a dilutant instead of building into it, because he's using what feel like very generic words, especially in his spoken dialogue, of like, but what does that actually mean? It's an opportunity to build the actual meaning of like the religion of the game that's not really taken advantage of. And so like this is something where I'm thinking about as somebody who wants to be like, or somebody who is a game designer and world builder, I want to think about how are things that I'm putting in to just flesh the world out, how do they successfully do that? Like, how can I successfully be adding little elements, throwaway lines of dialogue that are adding to the world building rather than diluting it, is kind of where this kind of comes in. Probably you are the PC. 70 videos. So it's like there's a lot of I'm gonna go back to Serenia Temple. So there's a lot of like really interesting religious world building that ArenaNet did with Guild Wars 1. And then they have, for example, right there, they have Mirek just kind of doing some generic religious sounding dialogue, and it feels to me like, oh, that is an opportunity where they could have done something to really kind of flesh out these things more. So this is just one of the first things that I had as an observation. Oh man, my next bullet point here is a great one. Consider how world regions connect. Some players will get the feel of a region by those connections more than how they're laid out on a map, and how areas connect together matters. Okay, so what this is talking about is, for example, the initial thing that this is kind of referring to or coming from is you would not think of how close Divinity Coast is to Temple of Ages, because if you're mapping this out in your head in terms of like the way things connect, excuse me, first of all, Nebo Terrace here has this very specific shape, and then it goes into Cursed Lands. You have a big horseshoe going on with Kryta, right? Where you have, it's more coming off of Nebo Terrace, but when you look at this area here, you have this sort of horseshoe effect of its arrangement. And so Divinity Coast proximity to the Black Curtain and Talmark Wilderness is basically invisible because of the way that regions are connected. And so what this is about, and what this point is about, is when you're putting together a map, or when you're putting together connections between levels, the way that the player is going to interpret the layout is going to, or at least for some players, such as myself, I can't speak for all players, of course, is going to be determined by what those connections practically feel like when you're playing. When I'm playing, it feels like Temple of the Ages is very far from Divinity Coast and Beetleton, even though it's basically on Watchtower Coast. If, on the other hand, it's very Gameston feels it. If, on the other hand, Temple of the Ages had a second exit that led into Watchtower Coast, suddenly it would connect Kryta, like, dramatically. And that would do, like, something like that would do a lot to make Kryta feel like a more unified place. As it is, it feels like you come into Nebo Terrace, and then there's a T branch, where one path goes up to Beetleton and Divinity Coast, and the other goes down to, like, the Temple of the Ages and Talmark Wilderness. From a, I mean, the start of it was a year ago, Fear. And time moving on. A lot of it was through 2020. So that's going to be part of it as well. But yeah, so that sort of geographical thing is just something to be aware of. That the way that world regions are connecting and how the player is moving between areas is going to influence how those areas feel in terms of their layout. Even if, from a technical, like, on the map standpoint, things are closer together than they feel. Because, like, the ruins of Sirmia is actually really close to the Great Northern Wall, but you can't just go across those, right? You can't just go from this outpost over to the Frontier Gate, even though they're right next to each other. Yeah, you'd expect there to be a lot more connections in some parts of the world than there actually are. Kryta is, I think, the shining example of where this is wonky. Especially right here. I really think that Temple of the Ages should have had a connection to Watchtower Coast. But anyway. Yeah. Okay, next point. Quest density should be well considered in relation to the narrative. Most of the game after Ascalon is shockingly light in quests. This is talking about prophecies. This works in the Shiver Peaks, where the narrative is moving things forward, but feels rather light in Kryta and especially empty in Henge of Dinravi. And this has several subpoints. Notably, establishing things through quest interactions can also strengthen the narrative. The idea of the Shining Blade being villains would be far stronger if we had seen more of them in quests than them getting framed in Hot Springs Murder's quest. So this is referring to the idea, like, we're basically told in Druid's Overlook that the Shining Blade are villains that have captured the Chosen, and we need to go rescue the Chosen from the Shining Blade. And we see like a cutscene, I think after Divinity Coast, showing them. And there's like implication in the dialogue where it's like, oh, when it's reframed, you can understand it the other way. But the only quest that deals with Shining Blade is the Bergen Hot Springs murder. I don't know if it should be a hard or soft G. English is dumb. We should always have hard G's, and if we want soft G's, just use J's. But that complaint about English aside, in Bergen Hot Springs, that we have the quest about the murder there, where it's clear, where it's clear that the Shining Blade are being framed. They're being blamed for White Mantle aggression, right? There's nothing to kind of build up the idea that the Shining Blade are villains. There's no quest dealing with them outside of that one, which is throwing suspicion on the White Mantle rather than the Shining Blade, in effect. And it would be really nice if there had been more quests to kind of establish that, as an example. The next sub point here on this one, Henge of Dinravi is supposed to feel like a base of operations and a point where we can relax some. The fact that it has no side quests makes it not feel like that at all. So Henge of Dinravi's complete lack of side quests really contributes to a sense that, it's just a stop. It is a gas station on the way between Aurora Glade and Riverside Province. And if there had been... First of all, if there had been a connection, like, somewhere, but, like, if we had gone from Henge of Dinravi and had side quests that took us in to Kryda to do anti-mantle operations before we got compromised at Henge of Dinravi, that would have done a lot to help that phase of the game and flesh it out and make it feel like something. As it is, we just pass through Henge of Dinravi. On the other hand, this is the next sub point. On the other hand, the quests with Deeproot outside of Antari's Refuge feel weird to have there as lengthy pauses while the main narrative hurries us along. So this whole like main point is that the way that you're positioning quests, and the way that they fit into sort of the narrative flow has sort of significance. So again, just to kind of reemphasize, like Ascalon has a bunch of quests, which makes sense. There's a lot of stuff to do there. And then you come here, and once you get like to Yak Spend and Beacon's Perch, there's a couple of quests, but not many. And they're all focused on you're trying to get the caravan through. And the idea that it's lighter on quests here because there is narrative momentum driving the player forward makes a lot of sense. You are trying to get your people over the Shiver Peaks. This is not a base of operations. This is a place that you're passing through. And that's sort of emphasized with the quest density, or can be emphasized with quest density. But then the fact that quest density doesn't really pick up that much when you get to Kryda, and is especially light over here in the Meguma jungle, is kind of an issue. Like it, and so to kind of get to what the subpoint is saying, the quest with Deeproot outside of Antari's Refuge, Deeproot has a couple of quests outside of Antari's Refuge, taking you into the Reed, Bog, and the Falls, taking you into these maps to do some stuff, and it feels very weird, narratively when you think about it. Yeah, Yaxman has, because it has quests for each profession, right? So Ventari's Refuge, like when you're stopping by here, it is on the way, like you are trying to get your people out and into Aurora Glade because the Demigod is coming through and attacking everybody. So the fact that you're suddenly stopping to do a couple of quests here, particularly a lengthy one taking you into the falls and stuff, feels very strange. It feels like it would have made more sense to have those quests come from the Henge of Dinravi, rather than sort of interrupt the narrative, like pressure coming from the Ventari's Refuge area. So that was the next thing that I was kind of thinking about, is like where you're positioning quests and where the way that you're kind of weighting them and putting the density and everything, having that align with what the narrative is at the moment has a lot of... It's something to strongly consider. Let's see. And then I had a final subpoint in here under this quest density greater point, which is quests are how you sell certain things to the player, notably investment in a place or group of characters. Um, where's the water in Ettin's Rock? I mean, there's presumably some water in some of these ravines. But, yeah, so if we're supposed to be investing in an area, like investing with a Shining Blade, we need quests with them. Because having quests with them is what helps that actually happen. And, oh, we just got favor. We missed the lightning strikes, but here's the statue of Dwayna rising. Oh, there's some more lightning strikes. So cool. I love that animation. There's another one for it falling down when we lose favor. Of course, Melandria is now green and flowing. If you ever want to see these, by the way, this is just a quick aside. If you ever want to see these god statues gaining favor animations, they play when in the Gate of Madness mission when you get the statues rallied, or when you get one of the gods rallied to you, then it plays the animation of the statue gaining favor. But yeah, so when we're supposed to be invested in the Shining Blade, the fact that we have so few quests with the Shining Blade, establishing with them is something that is a problem. And the same thing when we're supposed to be the White Mantle, we're supposed to be getting invested here. The fact that we have so few quests is a problem. Yeah, it happened during the slow playthrough. Yeah, most of them are not very dramatic. The Melandria one, so like Lissa just has the thorns recede. The Grenth and Balthazar ones are just getting their particle effects going for the fire or the frost. The Grenth one's okay in that regard, and Balthazar one's okay. The Lissa, like I said, has thorns recede. Melandria has plants grow out of it, and the water start pouring. By far the best one's the Dwayna one. It has like bolt of lightning, and then the statue starts rising together, and some more bolts of lightning. It's extremely dramatic. But yeah, I do have that one in Serenity Temple in the Prophecy Slow playthrough. That's where I first saw it, because I was standing in this basically the same spot talking about something. So that's some stuff on quest density. Let's see. So then my next bullet point. Let's actually drink some water. There's gonna be a lot of talking. So. Yeah, because all of the like leaves and stuff fall down, if I remember correctly. Okay, so my next bullet point in my list of notes is if you're using a quest to introduce something, make sure to actually introduce it there. The Signet of Capture quest being in Kryta, but the first elite skills to capture being in the Crystal Desert creates a disconnect in mechanics. Either elite should be capable in Kryta, or the Signet of Capture shouldn't be introduced until the Crystal Desert. I lean towards the former. So there's a couple of things that come off of that one. For one thing, there's a density, a real density of elites that they need to fill into the latter portion of the game, the Crystal Desert and beyond portion of the game, which is where we get so many of the rotating bosses and things. It would have been a bit nicer if they'd spread out the elites a bit more. But this is the main point here is we're introduced to the idea of the Signet of Capture. By the time you finally get to an area where you can capture elite skills, like when you get it, and it's just like, okay, I can use this to capture skills that are potentially otherwise available. And that's not entirely accurate. Like, there's some skills that aren't available until there. But especially if you have have more skills unlocked. You probably know how Signet captures work. But just capturing ordinary skills is fairly unexciting. It feels like a lot of overhead to be able to get a regular skill. The fact that there's no elite skills to begin capturing in Kryta feels like a real oddity to me. And introducing the Signet of Capture here, there's actually, if I recall correctly, dialogue indicating of like, this is the way to get some particularly potent skills, but there's no examples of elite skills to actually do that with. If there had been in Kryta, then players would see the value of it. And like, obviously, you've got all sorts of things to kind of correct for this deficiency. But especially if you're making a single player game where players may not be looking up information right away or things like that. Some will, but where there's going to be plenty of players who are not doing that, you want to make sure that players are realizing this is how this works. You introduce a signature of capture and say, hey, you can capture skills off of this. You'd want those enemies in Kryta, those bosses in Kryta, to have elite skills. So that way, as a player, you are understanding why this mechanic is valuable. And making it clear, like, this is how you get elite skills. You want to make sure to do this. And the fact that there's literally no bosses with elite skills until the Crystal Desert is just bonkers to me. So that was something that struck me as very, very strange. Of like, oh, you're introducing the signet of capture here, but you're not actually introducing any elite skills to capture with it. And like, that's the main reason for capturing, is to capture elites. It's a game that teaches you nothing. Okay, let's see. That was that one. Next bullet point. You have to sell the plot to the player to give them something to hang on to. You have to put some effort to convince the player such and such a thing is true, basically. Not sure exactly what I was thinking about when I put that one in there. But, I think I don't know what that particular one was. I mean, I agree with the point. I just don't know what I was being inspired by to write it here in this. There's potentially some parts of I think part of the thing that's going on here that this might be referring to is we're, like, kind of glide along a little smoothly, if that makes sense. Like, they spend a lot of time getting us established with Ascalon and invested in Ascalon. And I'm just kind of speculating on what it was I was thinking about when I wrote this. I should have included more context. So, like, up through, like, the Frostgate and into Kryta kind of makes sense. And then we just become Knights of the Mantle, and then we just slide from that into joining the Shining Blade, and slide from there over to, I mean, transition to the Crystal Desert's okay, but it's like this whole process of Kryta through the Maguma Jungle, where we join the White Mantle and then join the Shining Blade, kind of goes a little like smoothly, and there's not enough sort of transition between the two phases. I think might have been what I was talking about. I don't know why I wrote this one. Okay, next one. Be careful about how explicit elements of lore are, and keep in mind who is giving lore dumps. So, this one... hey, Korngar the Mighty. The plot give the player invest in Ascalon little reason to care about the Civil War in Kryta. Yeah. I think, like, they put a lot of time into Ascalon. There's so many quests here. It's so fleshed out. It's really interesting. And we'll get more into it later in this, I'm sure. But I'm actually going to hop over to Borless Pass. But, like, Kryta just feels like it received, like, just a tiny fraction of the effort Ascalon got. And they really needed more quests to build up our investment in Kryta, in my opinion. Kryta needed to be a lot more fleshed out. The game, ironically, should be slower. Okay, so why does the human mission NPC in Borless Pass know so much about the Dwarven Civil War? This is my first bullet point in this section about being careful about how explicit elements of lore are, and keep in mind who's giving lore dumps. So when I say explicit here, that's a word that can be a little bit overloaded. I'm just talking about, like, the degree of accuracy in detail being presented. So this NPC right here, Beckham Reedley, talks about being glad to leave Ascalon and the Char far behind. Aren't you supposed to be headed over the pass to Kryta? It's been snowing Borless Pass for days. If we try to follow Uruk now, we may be swallowed by the storm. Uruk's out in the storm. He's trying to negotiate passage for us through Borless Pass. He's supposed to meet with Jealous Ironhammer, king of the Deldrimmer Dwarves. Isn't someone going after him? It's dangerous. The chances of getting lost in the cold, etc. It was not always so. Years ago, when Ascalon regularly traded with the Deldrimmer Dwarves, the storm beacons were erected to light the way through Borless Pass. The dwarves were expecting us. They would light the beacons, and we could follow them to safety. Another pass through the Shiver Peaks. There's Lornar's Pass, but it runs north to south, and it won't take us to Kryta. Besides, you can't get to it from here. Besides that, there is one other way through, but I wouldn't call it a pass. The treacherous northern route winds over Anvil Rock, but the way is guarded heavily by the Stone Summit, a group of xenophobic dwarves who have separated themselves from the rest of Dwarven society. A hatred of all things non-dwarf burns in the heart of their leader, Dagnar Stonepate. He is at odds with the good King Jealous Ironhammer and with anyone from Ascalon. A civil war brews in the Shiver Peaks now as the Deldrimmer Dwarves fight the Stone Summit for control of the mountains. How does Beckham Reedley know this much detail about the Stone Summit? How does she know who their leader is? How does she know what his motivations are. How does she know about, like, who is she talking to? Yeah. But it's established that she's part of the refugee camp. Yeah, it definitely, I'll agree. If, like, so much of the development's there. There's actually a lot of development in the Crystal Desert as well. But it feels like Kryta and the Maguma Jungle really are shafted in terms of development. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Although it sounds like the Stone Summit may be more recent. But it's just like, why does she know so much information? The other thing is my next sub point in my list of sub points. I'm not holding that well for you to see it, but whatever. Is sometimes too much information is worse than too little. In fact, I think there is an uncanny valley of lore where it just makes things feel shallow instead of either hinting at depth or explaining great detail. And the Stone Summit fall into this for me. They're basically given the singular motivation of xenophobic with enough detail to make them seem shallow and pathetic. Less information, like the Char, and they could just be a foreign menace that I don't feel like I need to know more about. But at the level they're at, they just feel too complete and too superficial at the same time. So this is something that, to me, is... like, I wish there had not been this much detail. I wish it had just been, is guarded heavily by the Stone Summit, a separate group of dwarves that are engaged in a civil war or something. Like, why do you have this whole thing of describing them as a group of xenophobic dwarves who separated themselves from the rest of dwarven society and a hatred for all things non-dwarf burns in the heart of their leader Dagnar Stonepate? Do we really need to know that they're being led by Dagnar Stonepate at this point? Do you really need to know that their motivations are apparently being described as xenophobic and a hatred for all things non-dwarf? Like, it would have been, in my opinion, better here if there had been less information. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there wouldn't be any trade routes between Ascalon and Kryta, but there would have been supply lines during the Guild Wars, presumably, if the fighting got over into the Krytan side of territory. So it's very possible that they would have had caravans going through the Shiver Peaks in order to fuel the Guild Wars in Kryta, if Ascalon was going well there. I don't know how they're getting food at this point, but yeah, that's a huge issue. To some extent, a lot of these practicalities are hand-waved. Don't really discuss where food's coming from in Ascalon. But yeah, so like the Stone Summit to me fall into this kind of uncanny valley. So this is something that I want to be very careful of in like anything that I'm doing, where I need to make sure that I'm not presenting stuff in a shallow way, but where like I'm leaving the sense of depth implied. Because like I said, this feels too like, oh, okay, that's just it then. And it's like, right, yeah, a lot of stuff works on hand-wavium. But this feels a bit too much like, oh, well, that's the full story then. And it would have been nice if this hadn't tried to explain things to the degree that it did, because then it feels like that's the full explanation, and it makes things feel kind of shallow as a result. Let's see. The next bullet point about lore stuff. Things the player's characters should know should likely be clearly defined to the player too. This can be uncovered lore, but it should be clear. So, some examples. When the heck did the Char invasion actually happen? What were the events leading up to it? When was Adalburn crowned king? What was going on in the approximately 20 years before the start of Prophecies, in a general sense? The official timeline feeling contradictory with in-universe stuff, especially Korea's statements about the Char invasion, really don't help. So, for those who don't know what I'm talking about here, let's go to the Gates of Kryta. Or no, Delesio Seaport. Attempting to brutally disembowel each other. Yeah, that's good relations there. Okay. So, Mantle Knight Korea says, let's see, I'm going to just poke through this. In the year 1062 AE, the Char invaded all three human kingdoms. The continent of Tyria was in turmoil. The scepter was lost somewhere between when the Char attacked Ascalon and when they reached the borders of Or. Okay, this is 1062 AE is 8 years before Pre-Searing. Pre-Searing is in 1070 AE. So did the Char attack in 1062 AE? Is that when the Char invasion actually began? Or did they attack in 1070 AE at the start of Pre-Searing? Like, just not long before Pre-Searing began. The official timeline, so if you go to, like, the wiki, where they have the timeline, and the timeline is backed up in one of the books, by the way. But if you go to the wiki, and I'm loading it up now, theoretically, it says 1067 is the earliest date given to the White Mantle's existence. Let's see, in the first year of the Test of the Chosen. There's nothing in 1062 mentioned here about the Char invasion. It says, in 1070 AE, the Char invasion and the Searing ravages Ascalon, bringing an end to the Guild Wars. So it's indicating that that is when the Char invasion began. Yeah, they'd been fighting a while before the start of Pre. I agree. Let's see. There's a major continuous highway running right from Orgrimmar's front. So it's like the fact that Karya here in universe is saying, "Oh yeah, the Char invasion began in 1062 AE. That's when the Char invaded all 3 human kingdoms." Feels like it's like directly contradictory to other official material. We should have very clear information about what happened here because, or at least somewhat clear information, because this is in recent memory. This would be like, let's see, this would have been 10 years ago in game time. So this would have been like people forgetting what happened in 2011. Or like not knowing when if something happened in 2011 or if it happened 2 years ago. Like, a lot of this stuff should be a lot clearer. We should be able to know a lot more of this information. And it really feels like there should be a lot more, like, just general knowledge, especially presented in the game and in universe, about, like, what are recent events. Like, why is there no, like, history of Ascalon's king? Like, okay, so like, Regent Valley, in fact, would be the perfect place for this. Because this is the traditional place where kings were crowned, right? Is over here in Regent Valley. I think specifically, like, right over in here is where it's indicated. Why is there not, like, a monument there saying when people became king? Like, there should be a monument. Well, it's indicating that they traded with that at one point in time humans traded with Ascalonians traded with the Deldrama dwarves, but why is there not a monument? Like, there is a monument at King's Watch right over here. Why does that monument not have, like, on this date so and so was crowned king of Ascalon? Like, we should know when Adelburn was crowned king, for example. So there's just a lot of, like, oh, this is stuff that should be in recent memory that the player characters should know, so why doesn't the player know, sort of thing. Another thing, and in general, more recent history should likely be a bit on the clearer side unless world powers are intentionally trying to obscure it. This is just a general continued note about history. Yeah, you can have caravans going over passes. Ascalon doesn't really have any great ports. It's boxed in by mountains. It's Mordor. Mountains all around it. But even Mordor has the Sea of Nurnen. And then, of course, this becomes less important the less relevant the lore is. So anything about the lore only matters as much as the lore is important. But, oh, man. So here's my next bullet point. Yeah, not every civilization has their own empire. That is 100% true. Next bullet point. Player knowledge does not equal world knowledge. I found several points in prophecies to be weird disconnects. Watchman Arad and Fisherman's Haven, everyone knowing about the Mersat after Dragon's Lair, where we're told but not before, when NPCs apparently have the same knowledge as the player, but without having gone through the experiences of the player required to acquire that knowledge. So yeah, Watchman Arad over here. This is... Yeah, but it's on the eastern coast, I think. Watchman Arad over here, and I don't know if it's in his default dialogue. The Lion Guard must act swiftly for we to wrest control of Kryta from the hands of the White Mantle. So he clearly, like, his dialogues make it clear that he's anti-White Mantle, and maybe that's why he's all the way out here, but that's not indicated super well. So I have some additional subpoints. This could be mitigated by explaining where or how the NPCs got that knowledge. So what I'm talking about here is we know that the White Mantle are secretly sacrificing the Chosen on the Bloodstones. First of all, most White Mantle probably do not know that. That's probably something kept secret. And most members of the White Mantle are probably aware of, like, that there's stuff going on with the higher-ups, and they probably are vaguely aware that the people who have gone off to the secret training haven't returned. But they have this whole pretense of, like, taking people off to get special training at the special White Mantle thing. Like, okay, so just on the trading route thing, the NPC in Borless Pass, Beckham Reedley, said that they traded with the Deldrimmer Dwarves, and that the storm beacons on Borless Pass that you light at the start of the mission were traditionally kept lit to enable that sort of trade route between the humans going from Borless Pass to where the Deldrimmer Dwarves are, but that those have gone out and they're not expecting them and things along those lines. So, but yeah, there would be, like, and that's exactly what the storm beacons are. They're markers of where the trade route was, but it wasn't a trade route with Kryta, it's a trade route with the Deldrimmer Dwarves, probably in Croc's Hollow, I think it is, because this is Grubble's Gulch. But I think it's Croc's Hollow right over here. So there was likely at least trade up into this area. And Yaxbend is also a popular trading rest place. So this is what exists between Ascalon and Kryta. I mean, the Ascalonians and the Crichtons didn't really have their trade was always kind of spotty because of the guild wars that kind of cropped up, but there's probably a period of peace where they had trade between them. But, like, that would have probably been through the Frostgate area when it was still... Because, like, part of what's happened is the Shiver Peaks are more treacherous to cross because of the Dwarven Civil War and things going into disrepair with some of those trade route things. But anyway, so, like, one of the things I'm talking about in this current point is most of the Crichtons do not know that the White Mantle are the bad guys. The Shining Blade have to convince them of that. There is nothing being done to do that convincing. I don't know exactly what's going on with the Bloodstone thing. I don't think it's just raw vampiric. I think part of what's going on is the Mersat have soul batteries, and I don't know why the ritual needs to be performed on a Bloodstone, but the Bloodstones are keystones of magic. So what's happening is that the sacrifice transfers the souls of the Chosen into the soul batteries that are then used to power the gate to close the door of Kamali in Abaddon's mouth. Which is why when we come back here on Hell's Precipice is a mission where we basically go in a big loop to get back to this area to fight the Lich. And when we kill him on the Bloodstone, it repowers the Mersat soul batteries with his soul. So I don't know how he's anywhere else. His soul should theoretically be trapped within the soul batteries that are keeping the door of Kamali closed. So the fact that he's in Nightfall is actually breaks lore. But Yeah, so that's what's going on there. Is it's where they're doing the sacrifice for the soul batteries, to charge the Mersat soul batteries, which is why in Abaddon's mouth, when we get into this area here, we're fighting. We break the ether seals, which releases the seal on the soul batteries that lets the souls escape. And then the souls, because of being trapped inside the soul batteries, are enraged, and they fight us. And then we have to dissipate them by destroying them when they come out and attack us in Hell's Breath or in Abaddon's mouth. But like, there should be more. Theoretically, there could be more stuff to kind of explain that. So, like I say, in the case of Arad, it'd have been really nice to have quests in Hengib and Ravi that have us go to Western Kryta to try and undermine the mantle. Having Arad be one of the first converts away from them would have worked well and fed excellently into his 2 actual quests. And then we have the Mersat business. So, the White Mantle have their unseen gods. How many people know that they're real things and what they actually are? Well, apparently everybody after we beat Dragon's Lair. And why is that? Like, how does everybody just magically know about the Mersat? The dwarves suddenly are talking about the Mersat. The Shining Blade are suddenly talking about the Mersat. Did we catch them up at some point in time? So I have my next bullet point here of why does the world suddenly know everything the players do? With saying, when it comes to the Mersat business, that's also complicated by the fact that we had to go through the trial of Ascension, we had to go through the Ascension ordeal to be able to awaken the gift of true sight just to be able to see them. Afterwards, somehow, everyone not only knows about them when they didn't before, possible exception of the dwarves given Guild Wars 2 knowledge, but that doesn't apply here, but they can somehow also see them. How does Saedra fight the Mersat, however briefly, in Ice Caves of Sorrow if she can't even see them? This makes no sense. So this is a huge problem. The Mersat are able to hide themselves. This is established. This is why we do not see them in Kryta. There are Mersat theoretically around in Kryta, but they have the ability to conceal themselves from our sight. Dwarves usually have infravision. There you go. They can see the heat signatures. But we had to go through this whole process to get the gift of true sight because, I mean, Ascending did more than that. But one of the effects of Ascension, one of the main reasons why we did it, like, Ascension is what enables us, the players, to be able to change our secondary profession, for example. It is the thing that makes us beyond normal humans, and actually have the ability to change our secondary profession, because that is not normally a thing that can happen. So we go through the whole effort of going through the trial of Ascension, and part of the main impetus for doing that is because those who have ascended have the gift of true sight, which means, like, invisibility magic no longer works. So theoretically, if we were in Guild Wars 2 land and somebody managed to go through the trials of Ascension, Cloak would no longer work against them. Like, you would no longer be able to become invisible. You can no longer hide yourself from somebody who has ascended. It is a big deal that we are now able to see the Mersat. So why is it that after we go through all that, like, extreme process to be able to prevent them from being able to hide from our sight, it just means that now these enemies spawn? Like, theoretically, if you haven't ascended and you get to Ice Caves of Sorrow, you should just be getting killed out of nowhere. Because you should not be able to see the Mersat. It shouldn't suddenly Spectral Agony is on you and you die. And you're like, what the heck is happening? But I mean, that's obviously they didn't build it that way. Like, from a game design standpoint, all they've done is Mersat are special enemies that spawn later in the game. That's it. And Ascension, all Ascension actually does mechanically is enable you to do one of the 15 attribute point quests, because it's a prerequisite for that. And it enables you to change your secondary profession. That's what it does. It lets you change your secondary profession. But from a lore standpoint, Ascension gives you the gift of true sight that prevents the Mersat from hiding from you. So why is it that Saedra can see the Mersat? Why is it Avenia can see the Mersat? Why can the dwarves see the Mersat? Why can Breckner Ironhammer fight against them? Like, the fact that the Mersat are able to hide themselves from most mortals' sight is a huge deal that leads us to the Crystal Desert. So then why is it that suddenly it's no longer a thing? It's just bonkers and doesn't make any sense. So, like, lessons from this particular thing for me are to, like, make sure that I'm not conflating player knowledge with world knowledge. That just because the player knows something doesn't mean the entire world knows it. If something happens for the player that makes them special, that should be something that makes them special. The Mersat, why get Saul D'Alessio see the Mersat? That's a good question. The Mersat are able to hide themselves from mortal vision, which means they're also able to reveal themselves. The gift of true sight means that they can no longer hide themselves from us, but they can reveal themselves. They don't have to remain hidden. So they intentionally revealed themselves to him. Yeah, as Korangar the Mighty says. So I don't know. Why is Daedra able to see the Mersat without having gone through Ascension? You know, that's why are the dwarves able to see the Mersat without going through Ascension? Maybe they reveal themselves in late game. Maybe, but if you have the ability to be invisible when you're fighting things, I think you'd use that power. I mean, it depends upon what true sight actually means. I think of true sight as being able to have things not hide themselves from you rather than, like, not having your mind confused. Like, I don't know that true sight would protect from dementia, for example. But, I mean, that's another question that you can ask entirely. Okay, next point on my list. Mechanics can help tell parts of the story, and showing is powerful. This is an important lesson from pre-searing Ascalon. Their relatively late inclusion of the zone got players attached to it, not just NPCs. Enough stuff happens there, and it is interesting and uniquely beautiful enough that we get really attached. So this isn't like my final point on prophecies, but that the fact that we permanently lose pre-searing Ascalon by going through the searing, that mechanical storytelling of what we as the player are experiencing is extremely powerful, and figuring out how you can show what's happening in your world through the mechanics and having the mechanics sort of carry that legwork rather than just telling people about it. Because originally, for those who don't know, I did not know this until somewhat recently, pre-searing Ascalon was introduced fairly late into the game's development. They had a bunch of NPCs in Ascalon talking about how beautiful it used to be, but they didn't show that to the player. The player didn't get to experience it, so they didn't have any real connection. And so later on, they're like, you know what? We should build the tutorial area as pre-searing Ascalon. So they did that, and that was an extremely powerful decision. And so finding ways of being able to have stuff expressed mechanically like that, of being able to do something so impactful, is really, really powerful. And would be great to have a separated area and factions in NF. I mean, I don't mind that they do something different than what Prophecies did, but I certainly love what Prophecies did. And good old pre-searing Ascalon. Like, they put a lot of work into making this place exist. And by connecting us to Ascalon in this way and then having the searing, it's such powerful storytelling, and it's something that I personally really love. And I wish that there had been something of similar potency. I know. I mean, that's part of what can help it be so polished, though, is when you add pre-searing after you've spent a bunch of time developing the game. That does a lot to help. Like, you know how to make the game at that point, so that does a lot to help. Something else that I didn't put in my notes here, but that I remember talking about extensively, and that's a very important lesson for me. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in pre-steering that's kind of like missing from where it should be. I don't know if... Are you talking about the Regent Valley marker that should be... like here or something. I don't want to spend a lot of time wandering around. But one final thing from Ascalon that I really, really like is what I call the frayed edges, where it's you don't quite know what's possible because, like, as Guild Wars goes on, and this is probably more of a general thought, but as Guild Wars goes on, one of the things that happened is that they got very formulaic in how things were put together, which is not necessarily bad because it means you know what to expect. So I'm talking about things like weapons. Weapons are a big area where this is very, very, very visible. Where when you look at some of these things, like Guardsman Noel over here, this collector, when you look at the stuff that these collectors offer, you get some weird stuff. Like, here's an Earth Staff with armor +5 versus lightning damage, armor +3 while casting, armor +3 while enchanted, and energy +3 while hexed. This is a truly weird weapon. What's up with this bonkers weapon? These are just ordinary. But here's a Crimson Carapace shield that gives you +5 armor while attacking, but -5 armor while casting. The fact that you have some of these collectors with, and also quest reward weapons with really weird mod configurations is really interesting. It's really cool. It gives you a sense that you don't quite know what weapons are going to look like. And then as you go on, and as they kind of develop things, they figured out what stuff should look like. And so you kind of get a more unified design vision, but it means that you then understand the parameters in which things are formed. And so I like these weird weapons because to me they feel like what I call frayed edges. So it's this idea of, you know, you if you have a map, right, where it has very nice clean edges, you know where the boundaries and borders are, versus if it has frayed edges where it's like it's been torn from some greater whole, like there's implied other things. You don't know what the possibilities are. You don't quite know where the boundaries and borders are. That to me is more interesting from a like imagination possibility standpoint. I don't know what sort of gear I might find in the future if gear can be really strange like this, where it can have these sort of interesting mods going on, where it can have this sort of nonsense happening. I like this sort of nonsense. Ascalon is the biggest place where you can see this, plus like quest reward weapons. It's just not something that really kind of exists outside of this area. But I really like it. I really appreciate that it's here. And it's something that this sort of frayed edges, this sort of sense of possibility that Ascalon has, is something that I think about a good bit with stuff that I'm working on, of how can I imply both mechanically and through like lore and world building and stuff that the world just kind of like continues on, or that there's a lot here. That's something that the Ruins of Ascalon do really well for me as well. But those are, so that kind of sums up the Ascalon section. So you know that took about an hour, so that means we're good to get through this in the 5-hour streaming window, right? This whole thing. We're just gonna hop over onto Gyurudo Senso. Something you think something like this is really hard to do in our time of information availability. Most edges become clean edges over time anyway. Yeah, but it's more the implication. Like you're right. If there is any formula that exists will be found and will become understood, and you're correct on that, Fear. But even sort of the sense of it, like a good example of this in my mind from a different game is Santier's Spear from Dark Souls 2, I think it is, where you have this weapon that if you break it, completely changes functionality and form. That to me is a hint that not everything follows a really rigid formula, and there's a sense of like, sure, most stuff maybe does follow like a standard way of functioning, but I don't actually know that everything does. And that sort of sense that there could be some weird thing for me to discover just around the corner, that's what I really like about sort of these frayed edges, as I refer to them. So, like, even if it's known, well, these are the ones that exist, that process of discovery of playing through that first time experience of just not knowing exactly where the borders end up being is to me really cool. And I like that sense of like, well, I don't quite know what things this could actually be. It's something that I really like. Anyway, factions time. I don't think you can see that, but ultimately the idea only really survives during that low FO period of early game. The game will eventually clarify what you need to be competent. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But I still like the sense of possibility, if that makes sense. Like, there's going to be a discrete set of things. Like, there's ultimately going to be a discrete set of things. Infinite possibilities is not practical to try to do. And even if you do have a lot of different values, you're going to end up running into like a Hail staff head, for example, has many different possibilities, but only one of them's maximum. I think you need to differentiate between multiplayer online games and single player ones. I mean, sure, and there is a difference between those, but there's still lessons that can be drawn from it. DDO definitely becomes much less formulaic once you get into Epic, and they can expect single blues or oranges to fulfill basic assumptions with an itemization. Like, a good example of what I would have liked to have seen in Guild Wars 1 in sort of this area is if green weapons, unique weapons, literally were unique. If maybe not 100% all of them, but if they had stat blocks that couldn't typically be gotten other ways. So, for example, there was a sword that is a quest reward sword, so it's a non-max sword, but it has like damage plus 15% while enchanted, damage plus 15% while hexed, or something like that. Like, if you could get a green weapon that functionally replaced one of its mod slots with like a duplicate of another one, have effects that Rarecrafted cannot. Yeah, exactly. So like Path of Exile in that regard. Like, if getting a green drop was like, oh, what new piece of functionality have I stumbled across now? Like, that by itself would have been really cool, and would have done a lot to help kind of set greens apart, rather than just being another weapon within the standard organization. I think Fear was talking about what I was saying, Toapat, not your comment about. I think DDO is Dungeons and Dragons Online. I'm not positive. But anyway, factions. So, first bullet point in my factions list. Giving NPCs clear, distinct, and diverse personalities and opinions makes things feel more alive. This was notable with the various instructors on Xingye Island, which all have different thoughts about things from one another. Half the time the mods attached to those things are too situational, or reliability is what most players seek. Yeah. It's true that a bunch of mods can be very situational, but even opening up the possibilities is kind of nice. But like, imagine if you could get, instead of having a plus 30 sword, or like, imagine you got a sword that was like damage plus 15% while health is above 50, damage plus 15% while enchanted, and enchanting, but it didn't have a prefix, for example. Things like that could have been interesting. So yeah, this is one of those things that I noticed when playing through all of the faction stuff. Is that the different characters in Xingye Island, the different instructors all had very distinct personalities, and like thoughts about stuff. The way that they approached things was different. The way that they understood their profession was different, and I thought that was really cool and just made things feel a lot more alive to me. So, making sure that the NPCs have varied perspectives, even if they're fairly like briefly and somewhat caricature-ish. Having them be kind of like cartoon characters where they're exaggerated because you only get to interact with them a brief period of time, it still helps the world feel more alive and more diverse when people are not all parroting the same thought. And when there's difference of perspective, even if those are kind of exaggerated. Next point that I had is it's hard to get maximum strength armor after leaving Xingzhe due to the cost of the armor itself. 1 platinum is a lot, even with how generous the quests are, especially if you've been busy buying skills, and especially materials. So the cost of getting the rare crafting materials. This makes new players without banked materials and gold super squishy until they can get enough supplies. I didn't have this problem in Prophecies because I got so much more playtime during which to build up my supplies and materials, though I was pinched some on Glittering Dust. At least less than maximum armor is relatively cheap. So, this point, I mean, it's kind of a pacing thing, right? I distinctly remember how difficult it was to get all of the steel that I needed for my armor set. And I remember just being super squishy. Anything that's less than max armor in this game is quite cheap. Like, if we go to Saitang Harbor, and I find... Where is... There's the armor smiths over this way. Give my voice a little bit of a break. I've been doing too much talking. I talked to this person. Like, this stuff is actually quite cheap. 200 gold and a bit of cloth is not very much. Yeah. So this is one of the things that really surprised me. I remember going from... Because, obviously, you don't get max armor in Prophecies until Drachner's Forge, which means you have a lot more game in which to build up loot. Even if you're doing, like, all of the quests like I was doing, going through the game, you still only spend so much time on Xingzhe before you find yourself over in these areas. And because I was not accessing my bank on these characters, and you can see that in the playthrough. No, I'm not doing the hard mode versions, thanks. By the time I got here, I did not have sufficient resources to be able to get my max level armor. Whereas in Prophecies, I did, for the most part. With some exceptions with headpieces, and being short on dust. Yeah, you can get collector armor in the Crystal Desert, but that stuff can't be insignia'd, if I recall correctly. And you can actually get the same armor from that Amnoon Oasis has. You can get equivalent stuff from Soul Pyrus Soul or whatever. There's a weird armor crafter just outside Riverside Province, I want to say. This stuff, on the other hand, is substantially increased in cloth, and you also need the mask, which is like... Okay, so how much is Damask? That's a good question. Can I craft it after from Shu Yi? Yeah, Nightfall does teach that. Okay, so you cannot make the mask off of Shu Yi. There's an NPC somewhere that I can make it, I'm sure. Mask is 700 gold apiece. I wouldn't call that cheap. That's adding, if you're buying Damask, that's adding 2.1 platinum to your chest piece. If you're a new player with no resources, it's going to take a bit to get there. Yeah, I know there's one there. I was just going to look it up. How much Damask requires. So it is 5 plant fibers, 5 piles of glittering dust, and 200 gold to craft the dang thing. So, like, even crafting a bolt of Damask requires you to get some decent quantities of somewhat less common resources. Yeah. Is the Nightfall mandatory? Is the quest Nightfall mandatory? No, but it is available, and if you're just going around grabbing quests, you will find the stuff about salvaging and using traders and things. Like, my basic point is Damask is not, like, that available. I was using steel, and I think it requires more steel. But yeah, so just the run-up in Prophecies gave more time to get access to the materials and money that I needed to be able to craft my initial set of armor, and I did not have that in Factions. And in Factions, I was kind of scraping by, collecting resources to be able to afford my armor. I could see it being profitable. So anyway, my experience was that I just did not have the resources that I needed to be able to craft my first set of armor. And in part, that's just because the time between starting the game and crafting it was compressed enough that there's not as much time to actually get the loot. So it would have been nice if there had been quests that had given me crafting materials. Okay, next point. Make sure your lore fits in with the rest of the lore, or at least give a sense of how it does. How do envoys fit in with Grenth, the Underworld, and the rest of the Tyrian lore as a whole? I don't know, and that's a problem. So this is a huge issue, actually, that I have with Factions, is the envoys are a thing in Cantha. The heck do they fit into the whole, like, of everything with Grenth? Like, I'm cool with having envoys, but why do we not hear anything about envoys in Prophecies? They're all serving the same god, right? They're all serving Grenth, so theoretically there would be envoys for Prophecies if Grenth has a need for envoys. Separate mythologies. The Tyrian gods should not have been a thing in Cantha. I think that would have been a really good way of solving the problem, Korangar. I agree. But that's not what they did. That's not what they did at all. And so we have this confused mess of where do the envoys come in? How do they fit into the full lore? If you're making multiple areas and they're supposed to be sharing lore, make sure that their shared lore makes sense. Is basically what this bullet point is. Okay, so my next bullet point. Foreshadowing strengthens stories. If, when we'd been told in Vizuna Square that we had to become Ueno Su, Master Togo hadn't just said he was familiar with the celestial test, but also that doing so would allow us to speak with Vizu, who had previously bested Shido and whose spirit was ensconced in Tanakai Temple, then that would have foreshadowed our heading to Tanakai Temple after Nipui Quarter and strengthened the narrative through line. It isn't bad the way it is, but it could have been stronger. So this is a frustration that I have, where it feels like the way I kind of describe it in my mind is like each step of the faction story feels like it's only connected to the previous step and the next step. And there's not like information and concepts being spread across to kind of like draw a line from Vizuna Square to Nipui Quarter and Tanakai Temple is just to our next step. And it would have been nice if there had been some, foreshadowing indicating what's going on here and what our next steps would be. So if there had been that would have been really, really nice. I'll get to the what the hell is Shiro's plan thing, because I agree. I think, though, that comes up in here later. So I have a couple bullet points under the foreshadowing as well. So Kunaving is similarly important. The steps taken aren't always illogical steps to take. Some of the stuff doesn't make sense, but almost all of it is poorly set up, making the steps feel random or arbitrary, like they come up out of nowhere. So I think this one was like, we're told we need to go to the Harvest Temple. Are we told that we needed to do that to talk to Kunaving? And then the next sub-bullet point that I had here is, basically, it really helps if the players have an understanding of what their goal is and how they're going to try and achieve it. This doesn't mean that the presented path is going to be successful, but it makes it more compelling and engaging if the player understands their character's motives and purpose. Why do the Kurziks and the Luxons like us? I don't know. Favorability by association. The Kurziks like Menlo, Hey, judgmental unicorn, welcome. The Kurziks like Menlo, and the Luxons like Master Togo. So that's how we get the initial interactions in Boreas, Seabed, and Arborstone. Danica sees the problems of the plague and wants to help us do something about it. I know there's that connection. We actually get lines about them. I mean, we don't steal their holy relics. They give them to us to help fight Shido. And then we destroy them in Sunjiang District, and there's actually dialogue about that. They're like, you destroyed them. Why should we do anything with you? Getting from the Emperor that gives us safe passage through whatever territory to the Harvest Temple. I mean, why do we even need to go to the Harvest Temple? The game doesn't necessarily explain why we need to talk to Kunavang. It's just like, oh, we need to go to the temple. We're meeting at the Harvest Temple. Like, and I'd have to review the quest dialogue, but I'm pretty sure leading up to Unwaking Waters, the quest that we get in Vosburg Armory. Okay, so this is what I remember. After the Eternal Grove and Gyala Hatchery, we each get a quest that says, hey, we're meeting the other person in or like, you want to meet with blank. They went to the Harvest Temple. We're not told why they went to the Harvest Temple. Menlo's motivation for going to the Harvest Temple is because he's told Master Togo went there, and Master Togo's motivation for going to the Harvest Temple is because he's told Menlo went there. Yes, that is the NPC I was talking about. So, like, there's no clear reason why we're going to the Harvest Temple. It turns out talking to Kunavang was a really good idea, but that's not why we're told we're going there. We're told there because each one was told that the other is there, and they want to meet with them. Yeah, there's no reason to learn that Sulpyrus is there. That is 1000% true. So, like, this is the thing that I'm talking about with faction storytelling. I mean, Shiro's original thing was there, but when you see the end cutscenes for let's see, I'm not going to play the cutscene. I'm just going to look up the dialogue. If I can spell eternal correctly. Eternal Grove. So, maybe I need to go to the cinematics. I don't know. Opening cinematic. And cinematic. Look at this mess. So, are you ready to believe now? Believe what? Brother Menla says that Shido has returned. Baron Vasberg says, it's hard to argue with the evidence littered here at our feet. Party leader. Then it's settled. You'll help us gather the Kurziks together to fight Shido? Baron Vasberg, yes, we are with you. Party leader, even if that means fighting alongside the Luxons? Baron Vasberg, until Shido has been destroyed, we will look upon the Luxons as our allies. Menla says, well then, I think our work here is done. Let us go find Master Togo. And a Luxon guard captain says, if you're looking for Master Togo, you'll find him with our champion Argo in the Harvest Temple. And Brother Menlo says, then we must go to the Harvest Temple. And then this is followed by a quest. Sorry, I can't see chat right now while I'm looking at the wiki. Followed by Into the Whirlpool, which says, this is an unprecedented time. We Kurziks and Luxons haven't come together like this for the common good since 200 years ago, when the champion sought to destroy the very same enemy we now face. I pray that you're successful in getting to the heart of Unwaking Waters, or all of this unity may be for nothing. Master Togo believes we will find the secret of Shido's defeat in the temple that exists within the Whirlpool. So at least it explains why we're going there from that standpoint. But the thing that's weird is if you go to the Luxon side, the Gyala Hatchery, and we look at the end cinematic there, it's just skipping through a bunch of Luxon soldiers. Even if that means allying with the Kurzik, says the Luxon soldier, and Master Togo says, then let us find Brother Menlo. I hope he has made as much progress with the Kurziks as we have here today. And one of the Kurzik soldiers says, Brother Menlo, he was with Baron Vosberg. They were on their way to the Harvest Temple. And then Master Togo says, then we too must head to the Harvest Temple. Thank you. So the motivations as presented in those cinematics for why each one is going to the Harvest Temple is because they were told the other is going to the Harvest Temple. It is inherently paradoxical. And then this is followed by the quest to the Whirlpool. But it has a similar thing. Find the Harvest Temple, Huanjun, or whatever, which has been imprisoned in jade these 200 years. There you will obtain the power that will help you, that will help us send Shido back to the underworld. This is another. The Emperor's very laissez-faire with his feudal contract. So, like, this is what I'm talking about, though, of, like, why... presumably they're able to defeat Zuhanuku before Archimedes came along and got turned into a spear. The whole narrative feels very much like it's being dragged around by this is the next step that we want the players to do. It's never explained why we think it's so important to find people who defeated Shido in the past in order to be able to best him now. Those all prove to be unhelpful in doing so. Vizu's not able to offer us any particular advice. The Luxons and the Kurziks coming together does not particularly help. Theoretically, their armies help deal with the afflicted or something, but is not clearly described. The reasons why we're going to the Harvest Temple are somewhat vague. Our motivations for going there as presented in the cutscenes are simply because the other party has gone there. So why does Brother Menlo want to go to the Harvest Temple? Because Master Togo went to the Harvest Temple. Why does Master Togo want to go to the Harvest Temple? Because Brother Menlo went to the Harvest Temple. Like, there's something inherently like... it only works if you don't see both sides. And so that's kind of... I wish the faction story had been more thoughtfully done. Okay. Yes. I have another note here. Make sure to translate idioms well. By this, I mean that idioms should be fully understood and the underlying concept translated. Also, it is a good idea to remember that often different cultures have the same idiomatic idea expressed differently. For example, English uses easier said than done, while, according to my Italian major sister, Italian uses between the saying and the doing there is an ocean. As a sub-corollary, be especially wary of this for expletives and exclamations. I think this had to do with a very weird thing that Danica says at the end of Arborstone, I believe it is. No, I just want... Okay, it's just Arborstone. No. I think it's somewhere here in Arborstone. Yeah, so in the cutscene when the temple begins falling, Danica says, Lissa be damned, I didn't see that one coming, which is a very weird phrase. I don't know why you would ever want one of your deities to be damned. That is a very odd phrase, and I don't know who wrote it, what they were thinking when they did it. I like one of the things that I like that Guild Wars does is they use a lot of expletives and invectives and stuff using their deities, like by Balthazar's beard. I think that's actually something Rourke says, like by Balthazar's beard, Rin burns. Like, that's really well done. But then they have this random line of Lissa be damned, which feels like it's trying to be a variant on, like, the request that God would damn stuff that is very common in English vernacular. But it comes out real weird, and I have no idea what they were doing with that particular... Like, presumably, It's only Grenth who would be damning people, because he's the god of the dead. But anyway. Perhaps so. Then perhaps the settling of the or the ending of the Jade Wind helps with that. But it's a very, very strange line. So I think that's what that one was done. The basic point remains, and of like, if you're going to make culturally adapted versions of idioms, that you want to think about what the idiom actually means and not just do kind of a surface level translation. But yeah, I mean, the fact that it's like, oh, we need to try to find an explanation for why she would say that is part of the challenge. Okay. So my next bullet point here, under factions, is consider how mechanics and story work together. If possible, find a way to marry the two closely. For example, if the Luxons could somehow move about, similarly to Nicholas the Traveler in a slow journey sense, then that would enhance the claims of their nomadicy. So yeah, this is just kind of a more of a general concept. I don't think that they necessarily would have had a good way of kind of doing that in the way Guild Wars 1 works. But if it was the sort of thing where when you go into a zone, like, the Luxons are not always consistent in where they're spawning, and you have an actual sense that they move around. They're supposed to be nomads, but you don't really feel it the way the game plays. And it would have been cool if they had done something to kind of indicate that. My next bullet point. Why are the Kurziks and Luxons important? Why should the people who defeated Shido as a mortal man have anything they can possibly give us to help us defeat him as... Page break. As a spirit. The entire plot following Tanakai, somewhat including it, until Unwaking Waters, makes little sense. Think about fundamental questions of why the plot is happening. To me, it feels like the Kurziks and Luxons angle is just a shoehorn in the factions part of Guild Wars factions, and it makes no narrative sense. In other words, if you want something to be important to the narrative, make sure it makes sense that it is important to the narrative. So this is something that really, really annoys me. There's no real reason for the Luxons to be nomadic anymore. I mean, that's also true. But this is something that really, 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 really annoys me. And I think... yeah, okay, I don't really touch on it anywhere, any other parts here. Yeah, looking for fish and things. Like, I mean, presumably they spend a lot of time on their Leviathans, which you can see in the map here, here, here. But they just... In Guild Wars 1 engine, they're just static structures, so... I don't know... It feels like Guild Wars factions had a plot where they're just where they, like, put some points on it and then drew lines between them, and didn't do a really good job of, like, making good through lines. Like, the whole factions portion, which occupies this whole section of the map, really feels ancillary to this main plot with Shido. Shido himself is very underexplored as a character. His motivations are underexplored. What he's trying to accomplish and why he thinks that's preferable or a good idea is not really well explored. He clearly has more power as an envoy because he's, like, nigh untouchable. And then as soon as he becomes mortal, we can kill him and make him Basically, by becoming mortal, he de-envoyed himself, and that made him weaker. The stuff with the Kurziks and the Luxons ultimately proves to be pointless, because the way to defeat Shido is to have him become mortal and then kill him. Like, the Spear of Arkham Morris and the Urn of St. Victor are completely ignorable in Sunjiang District. Why we spend all this time going to Arborstone and Boreas Seabed to get them? It feels like they basically, like, created a story about Shido, and then had the like, PvP concept of alliances, and I think they were trying to capture the energy of For the Horde and For the Alliance stuff from World of Warcraft with the alliances and factions, if I had to guess. And kind of try to create that broader factional rivalry. I don't necessarily think that's a great idea to fracture your player base like that, but, you know, you build some tribalism that way, I guess, that maybe can be leveraged positively. I don't really think so, but you can at least present some nuance in nuance to conflict, I guess. But the big issue here is it what the factions do not feel like the main point of factions. It feels like Alliance and Horde. It feels like the point of the factions is completely ancillary to the main story of factions, and then they're just kind of shoehorned in. I would have really liked to see something where the Kurziks and Luxons had finally had been at peace for a while now, and then Shido starts riling them up and getting the conflict going again. And the whole point of factions is that you imagine if in factions you started off as a Kurzik or a Luxon, if you started a new character, and you have to figure out what's going on and how to restore the peace. Like somebody who is young enough that all you've known is them at peace and not the war. And you have to kind of deal with, okay, I have friends from the other side. How do we unify this? How do we resolve this dispute and bring peace back? Why did this dispute break out? And that's where the Shido plot gets involved. Where maybe Shido needs the bloodshed to fuel some ritual or something that makes sense instead of being nonsense. Where he's trying to ascend to godhood or something. I don't know. But my basic point is if they could have done more to make the factions the central focus of the story instead of so ancillary, I think that would have made for a stronger narrative. The cultural appearances are too much baggage for the average player. What do you mean by that? I'm not actually sure what you mean by that. Could you elaborate, please? I presume you're typing while I wet my throat. While you're doing that, my last point was under factions is something particularly useful to keep in mind is to create space in the narrative for players to go do side questing. Factions does this particularly well with the befriending the Luxon's Kurziks quests, where the narrative forward momentum eases and encourages exploration. With the main problem with that being that it's so contrary to what's typically done that a lot of players are like, what do I do? And just want to try to power through. Most players don't want to look Goth Samurai or South Pacific Islander. Ah, I see. Yeah, I can kind of get where you're going there. That they're not designs that have as broad of a directional appeal. So I really like what the so they just went for affiliation. Yeah. Rather than membership. Mm-hmm. I can see what you're saying there. Yeah, I do wish that the if you're going to have the conflict between the Luxons and Kurziks be a thing, it needs to be, and I don't know why I didn't write it down here, probably because it was too primary of a thought, but this goes back to previous things I was talking about. You need to mechanically express the narrative of the world. And the fact that the conflict between the Luxons and the Kurziks the fact that conflict is relegated almost entirely to PvP and a few repeatable PvE quests feels really weird. If I am aligned with the Kurziks, I should be fighting Luxon NPCs out in the world when I'm in the explorables. I don't know. It feels like it needs to be structured differently. There needed to be more zones. Where's this map? Where's this map? Why are there not more maps connecting the Luxon and Kurzik territories? It needs to feel a lot more unified, in my opinion, than it is. But anyway, bypass you reach. Little Eridon Terrace. But yeah, I actually really like what they did with befriending the Kurziks and befriending the Luxons, where you have to just accumulate a certain amount of reputation points, and it doesn't matter how you get it. The problem is, from a gameplay standpoint, that is literally not how the game has ever worked up to this point. So players are not expecting it. So suddenly it feels like this massive how do I grind this thing out efficiently to actually be able to progress the main story? When the main story is that you need to earn the Kurzik's or Luxon's trust because you freaking broke their precious artifact, you jerk. Like, that's literally what's going on there. Is like, you want us to trust you when you went and broke our precious relic? Why should we do that? Prove why we should trust you. And that's what the befriending quests are all about. Is you regaining their trust. In order to, like, join them in their conflict and stuff. And to do that, you have to do quests for them, or you have to participate in PvP on their side. Or, like, kill monsters with their blessing. So that process, is what those quests are about, and I think that's really cool. I think it's really cool that they have this whole thing about having to befriend them. But it's just so unexpected that it makes it feel like you're being diverted from the main story. Or you could also do, like, Ultram Ruins, for example. Or on the other side here, Zashiva's channel. Like, yeah. So it's just one of those things where there's a lot that they could have done in order to you guys have Gods of Mortals, Gods Amongst Mortals. These are like the same guild. That's hilarious. The same guild holds both capitals, just about. Anyway, that was a complete side point. It's just one of those things where, like, I really like what they did with that, but then they didn't. And they repeated the problem in Nightfall as well, unfortunately, where you have the building the command post section, where if you're actually doing all of the quests and everything, it's not a problem to get to the rank. But because players are looking for the most efficient path to be able to just power the main story, it suddenly becomes a massive grind block. So, I guess so. So anyway, that's the notes that I had for the factions side. So let's hop on to a different character and go look at the at Nightfall. Oh, Imrahil. Travel to. Oh man, I love Commandant, or I love Istan so much. Istan, in my opinion, is the best part of Nightfall. Just about. Let's go to the Sunspear Great Hall. Okay. So these are my notes from. I don't know. You can't read this, but from Nightfall. Yeah, that's very strange. Okay, so my first bullet point is make sure to group tutorial elements together well. And I have 4 subpoints. So, having the basics tutorial immediately followed by the combat mechanics tutorial of Chawbeck Village works far better than factions delaying the equivalent mission, Minister Chose the State, until after you choose your secondary profession. So this is something that that works really well here in Nightfall. Is they have their basic tutorial, and immediately following that, they have Chawbeck Village. Like I said, instead of the nonsense of factions delaying that Minister Chose the State until way later, which is like Minister Chose the State and Chawbeck Village are basically the same mission, except one is paced better. The next bullet point under the tutorial section is having fun and rewarding tutorial quests designed to teach you how to use the various NPCs and related mechanics, salvaging, crafting, identification, runes, collectors, on the relevant kind of NPC was a really good idea. Most of this is praising the improved tutorialization in Nightfall compared to the previous games. Making it clear which decisions actually are permanent and which aren't, i.e. secondary profession, can reduce stress related to making decisions. So, this is another thing. Factions and prophecies both present the choice of secondary profession as a permanent decision. Nightfall says this is an important decision, but it is not permanent. You will be able to change this later. That's been true in all of the games, but being honest about it. in the dialogue, I think is a vast improvement. In Prophecies and Factions, it is lore-based to say that you cannot change your secondary profession because most people can't. The only reason why player characters can change their secondary profession in Prophecies is because they ascend, and in Factions because they go through the Celestial Test and become Wayno Su. Those are the requirements in order to be able to change your secondary profession. It's a superhuman ability to be able to change your secondary profession. That is simply, like, from a lore standpoint, that is simply what it is. But it creates a lot of confusion when the lore honest answer of you cannot change your secondary profession presents the secondary profession as a permanent choice when the mechanical truth is that you will be able to later. And it would have been really, really good if ArenaNet had been more upfront about that, because then you don't have people freaking out about, oh, how do I make sure I pick the perfect secondary profession? And Nightfall is truthful about this. It says, this is important, you'll be stuck with it for a while, but you will be able to change it later. And doing that, I think, is an improvement. And then having a repository of game mechanic information in a location in-game seems to me to be like a good idea. This is talking about Truer Fields, which is got a lot of space where you can look up stuff. You're probably not going to if you know the wiki exists, because it turns out the wiki here is very handy. So, you know, the wiki integration is really nice, and the wiki existing is a much more convenient and thorough place to look up stuff. But Truer Fields being a place that you know you can go to learn about the mechanics of the game is really good. They do have some of that spread throughout Factions as well, but I think it's better concentrated in Nightfall. So I was just overall very impressed with how they did the tutorial in Nightfall, as I think that they did a substantially stronger job with the tutorial in Nightfall than they did in Factions or Prophecies. Prophecies lacks tutorial information, and while I love pre-searing, it really could have done a much better job of teaching you how to play the game and what the mechanics are. Factions has really bad pacing and bad organization, where I think they overload you a bit on information up front, and then in that very initial tutorial area, and then Minister Chose Estate is both excruciatingly boring and extremely late in the tutorial process, relatively speaking. So it would have been, in my opinion, preferable to have the tutorial arranged more like Nightfall. And the fact that Nightfall actually explains a lot of NPCs through quests as well is a vast improvement and a very welcome change. So, like, I understand that they were tired of doing tutorials, but they kept getting better at them. Like, Factions was actually trying to teach you stuff, and then, unlike the way Prophecies did it, and then Nightfall really polished it up a lot. So, very impressed with that. Okay, next bullet point. Quest chains allow for a lot more depth of storytelling. This is one of those things that seems really obvious when you read it, but it really can add a lot. Easton has a lot of wonderful quest chains. So I was just impressed with, like, Factions has a lot more quests than Prophecies, or at least it feels like it, but most of them are disconnected. They're just like, here's a quest, and here's a quest, and there's a quest. And while Nightfall has probably too many quests, the use of quest chains, which I think they improve even further in Eye of the North, does a lot to kind of, like, build depth in the stories that they're telling, which I appreciated. Follow through, so this is my next bullet point here. Follow through on quests is great and makes the world feel more substantial. The fact that the fisherman actually buries his friends and erects gravestones in their honor is fantastic. So this is a quest in Easton, I think, about a fisherman whose friends are killed and then you avenge them. So he actually makes graves for them. This sort of thing where the world changes in response to a quest makes you, as a player, feel like you're part of something that you are impacting, and reduces the theme park feeling that games can sometimes develop. So yeah, this is something that I really, really appreciated that they did in some spots here, where when you do quests, things change. I forget exactly where this is. I think this is out in Zelon Reach, somewhere over here. I'm not going to go to it because I don't feel like running through enemies and everything, but they have a quest chain about a fisherman's friends dying and you avenging them, and then he erects graves in their honor, and that's a thing that changes in the world. That's so cool. I really really like that they did that, and I really like that they did stuff that changed the world in response to things that you did, and it makes the world feel more alive and more permanent in a way that I really appreciate. And like I said, it helps reduce the theme park feeling that games can sometimes have. My next bullet point: if you don't want your plot to be painfully obvious, maybe don't name your villains things like Abaddon. Subpoint: on the note of narrative, the Nightfall narrative feels painfully flat to me, at least Consulate Docks far into the game and based on my memory. So this is when I wrote the note. It was just after Consulate Docks. A lot of this is that I don't understand the motivations of the villains. I think this goes back to the issues I have with Shido versus the Char or even the Stone Summit. You have to be careful how much you give, how much you show. It is easier to get away with showing little more than it is showing not enough. I'll have to process this more though. So this point is basically like, and this is the same thing that I was talking about with the Stone Summit, where it is easier to get away with basically not showing very much, showing little more than it's not showing enough, showing not enough. Like it's a sort of like Uncanny Valley sort of thing that I was talking about. That's a weirdly constructed sentence, but I think my basic point with it was like, we are presented enough of what's going on with Varish, same as we're presented enough with what's going on with Stone Summit, that it feels like they have given us the full story of what their motivations and everything that's going on is. But then that feels very shallow, what we're presented with. And it would have been beneficial to have had less explained to us, so that way they're more of an unknown entity that we're dealing with, which is how the Char function, right? We don't really know much about what the Char are doing or why they're attacking us. But this is something that I was thinking about too, about the difference between groups versus individuals. The Varish has motivations. I assume she just wants to do something for Abaddon for some reason. It's not really well explained why. She was taught by Kayet. Why Kayet's indoctrinated into the cult of Abaddon, I don't know. But it's not well explained. But anyway, the difference between groups. So, like, you can have a group where it's like, oh, everybody who's part of this group has bought into some premise of the group, which the Char function as, right? Their military is attacking us. Why? That's something that they've chosen to do. Why they've chosen to do that is not something that we really need to know, in the same way as if we were being presented with what the decision-making process for the leaders was. Like, what is the motivations of the leaders that are driving the group is different than the group itself. She wants to be first among equals. Yeah, I don't. Where are you? What in-game sources are you using for that explanation? Because what's presented, what I'm recalling from the presentation is that she's trying to summon Abaddon because she's indoctrinated into Cult of Abaddon. Like, it's clear from stuff Morgan said that something changed in her at some point in time. And it's indicated that she's being indoctrinated in the Cult of Abaddon by Kayet. But, like, what it kind of comes down to is, like, I believe this mountain range right here that separates the countries is why. Like, this area is kind of an in-between area. So Vabi occupies this northern section and Korna this southern section. And it looks like there's a mountain range here. Obviously, the Desolation kind of blocks all this area off. I mean, why not have them be different countries? Not everything needs to become part of a big old empire. Like, for that point, why are Kryde and Ascalon different countries? Why does the world have any different countries in it? Why is not everybody under one giant empire of one Earth? The Elon. Yeah, it flows down here. And from areas up this way that are not well drawn. Yeah, it runs through multiple countries. I mean, the Amazon runs through a bunch of different areas as well. Anyway, I feel like Varish has too much presented, and because the plot of both Nightfall and Factions hinges on an individual, Cheeto and Varish, in those different ones. The fact, like, the char worked for me because they don't need to have a motivation, but for the plot of Factions and Nightfall to work, because it's centered on an individual villain more strongly, I do need a better sense of what their motivation is. Or at least they've presented enough of a sense of motivation. I think this is the problem. They presented enough of a sense of motivation that they just seem cartoonishly villainous. And it's not really, like, it feels too shallow and doesn't really explain, like, what their internal motivation is. It's just like, yeah. It would have been really nice if it had been handled differently, in my opinion. Oh man. Okay, so this next bullet point. The Nightfall story suffers from tonal issues and general consistency problems. Subpoints with some examples. Varish Asa is very much a Saturday morning cartoon villain, yet somehow General Morgan, who is a complex individual, doesn't see her villainy when it seems painfully obvious. This undermines Morgan's character. So that's one of my subpoints there. The next subpoint, fourth wall shattering collectors. I collect junk. Look at my mound of random trash. So the idea of collectors having additional dialogue was introduced with Sorrow's Furnace, and then continued throughout the rest of the games. And when you have collectors that are like, I am collecting junk, look at my giant pile of junk, it's strange. Then we have joke quests, like Drake's on a Plane, contrast with more serious matters, the Dejarin estate chain. Why are we allying with human-eating centaurs again? This is a big one for me. Like, how can we be the goody two-shoes heroes that we're presented as while allying with literal flesh-eating centaurs and feeding enemy troops to a friggin' Drake? And then killing Cornyn soldiers feels extremely casual, which contrasts painfully with the forced conscription narratives that are also prevalent. So, this is, you know, like, it's just one of these things that, like, I wish they had explored a little bit better. Like, we have a quest here about feeding this Drake, right? That's protecting, Ronduk, I think is the name of the village. My brain's blanking on it at the moment. But they have the Drake that protects them, and we take it out, and we feed it Cornyn soldiers. And we have centaurs that we're allying with over here. And they explicitly talk about eating Cornyn soldiers. And then we have quests over here talking about how the children are being force conscripted into the Cornyn military. Like, this is some grim stuff here. This is super grim, super dark. But it's presented in a very lighthearted way, whereas you're not thinking about the depth of it. Like, what's going on here with this? Other things that I have complained about. Why does Zed Shadowhoof think he can march into our base, threaten to expose it, and not get himself immediately executed or imprisoned indefinitely? What is his plan? His plan is terrible. Oh yes, his plan is they're going to cooperate with me if I threaten them. Why? I don't know. So these are just some of the things where it's like, and I don't mind quests that are a bit more jokey and a bit more lighthearted, but like the tone is all over the place with the game. And it would have been nice if they had like done stuff to kind of ground the serious matters more. I don't mind some lightheartedness and some fun and some jokes. Those are great, but like the skill is in figuring out how to balance moments of humor within the context of a more serious narrative, if that's what you're trying to do. But I don't know what exactly they're trying to do here. Like Varish Asa is very Saturday morning cartoon villain. Like, what are her motivations? Are like she feels like a character who has all that same depth, which is to say, not a ton. And then, yeah. So anyway, tonal issues and general consistency problems, like I said. And then my final point on Nightfall was Nightfall has a lot of quest chains. General observation. 2 subpoints. As a pro, this adds a lot of depth to the world. As a con, it involves a lot of running back and forth, which makes things take longer. Nightfall just took a long time because you're running back and forth doing a lot of quests, where you have to run off to some NPC somewhere, like Mirza Veldrunner. You're running off, talking to Veldrunner, doing the quest, coming back, and going back and forth. It's just all pain. It's a conscription of kids to be soldiers, or just like go first for the army. It's not child soldiers, but it's like they're talking about how they're having a hard time having enough manpower to work their fields because their young men are getting conscripted to the military. There's no child soldiers. I'm not talking about actual child soldiers, but like the elders who are no longer like that fit for the military are talking about how their young men and women are all being conscripted into the military, and they don't have people to take care of the fields properly anymore. That's more what I'm talking about. There is a lot of it's just a draft. It's basically a draft, but I mean it's forced conscription. Like I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong about a draft. I mean, I personally don't like drafts, but it's understandable in times of severe thing. My point is not the draft. It's that we learn that they are drafting them, and then we are casually allying ourselves with centaurs that are explicitly talking about eating the flesh of the fallen Cornan soldiers, and we are taking a drake around the fields and feeding it like the drake here. Oh, it's hungry. Give it some wildlife to eat. And you walk up to a Cornan troop, and you whittle down the warning troop so the drake can freaking eat them alive, and finish them off. Like, that's the issue that I'm more bringing up. It's that we are doing stuff like, you would think we're like, oh, they're taking basically innocent people into and dragging them along with their leader's cultish behavior, and they're never dealing with that in the full implications of it. We're not dealing with the fact that we have allied ourselves with these centaurs that are literally talking about, well, after you slaughtered all of these Cornan soldiers, that means we have plenty of food for our larder. Like, we have plenty of food to eat because we're going to eat these fallen soldiers. Like, the implications of these are more or less innocent people that have been forced conscripted, drafted into this war. By a, worshiper of a fallen deity, of, an not apocalyptic, I don't like the casual use of that term, to a world-ending destructive entity. Like, that whole thing, it feels like there's a lot of heaviness to that topic. It is not a light topic, but it's kind of played off. Yeah, but the thing is, and again, that's fine, but the problem that I'm running into is the ramifications of this are not explained. They're not explored. They're just there, and it's not dealt with at all by the game. It's not dealt with the fact that the centaurs eat humans. It's not dealt with the some of these ramifications. It's I can understand if it's we have to compromise ourselves to work with these centaurs because we need their support, and stuff. So it's just It's just one of those things where when I'm looking at what's going on with the narrative here, it feels like there's a lot of terrifying implications that, like, if you actually spend some time to step back and think about it, it's like, this is horrific. And it's just never really addressed in the game. Yeah, I'm not sure how all of the writing stuff came together for Guild Wars. Anyway, those were my notes on Nightfall. So that means it's time to jump to Eye of the North. So let's go ahead and swap characters to go to Eye of the North. Because I did Eye of the North on Rex Templaris. Yeah, and again, I don't know exactly what's going on with all of the writing staff. Okay, so my first bullet point here for Eye of the North is this starts off super in media res, which is fine, but that also leaves a lot of unresolved questions like, when did Ogden team up with the Asura to try and stop the destroyers? So, for those who maybe haven't done the move up or taken a character into Eye of the North recently, what happens is you go underground to an area where Ogden is trying to fight the destroyers that are suddenly starting to move about. It feels like they've kind of established some sort of organization for it. There's a bunch of dwarves doing stuff, which we actually see a couple of them that managed to survive in Boreal Station. And Vex there doing stuff, and it's clear that they know each other and have been working with each other. So yeah, Borvarel, Arcor Leadfoot, Julver Stoneforge, Boreal Ironfist. These dwarves managed to survive the way out through the Circuit Network. But it's just like, wait. How do Vec and Ogden know each other?
Interesting.
And
Hail and well met.
so it's like, what are these destroyers?
Hail and well met.
But it doesn't really explain, like, how did Vec and Ogden get hooked up? How did Ogden know that destroyers are the problem? And all that sort of stuff. It's just kind of under explained, and they don't ever really explain it. It would have been nice if there was a throwaway line somewhere explaining how Vec and Ogden got hooked up, or how the dwarves started working with the Asura on this problem. Would have been nice. Not done. Not the biggest deal, but it does leave a lot of hanging questions. Also, like, how long have they been working together and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so my next bullet point, which actually has several sub-ones, which is, what is the content your players actually want to play? I think this is a really important question that ArenaNet learned over the course of making Guild Wars 1, which is why so much of Eye of the North is dedicated to repeatable dungeons that offer notable and unique rewards. This is in stark contrast to Nightfall, which had a ton of quests and quest chains, many of which likely went ignored by most players. Subpoint. It should be noted that it does require feedback mechanisms, so you can learn this from your players. You can't just guess. Subpoint 2. I'll also add that I feel like ArenaNet put in good effort on the quests that are in Eye of the North. They feel well considered and polished. They all add useful layers into the world without overstaying their welcome or overlapping too much. So this is something that I noticed quite considerably with Factions, especially, where Factions has a lot of quests that are basically telling the same story, which is bureaucratic inefficiencies. They're doing the same thing, whereas Eye of the North quests feel like they're filling in pictures of a complete whole and not overlapping anywhere near as much on what's going on with things. And then a subpoint to that quest one. I'll give special note to the Tapestry Shred Gwen quest. That one has a lot of subtle work in it, in that many players wouldn't consider the modified enemy spawns that it required, and really shows the love ArenaNet put into paying off that particular investment. So that's one where, like, I really liked how they handled a lot of the quests in this, where, like, the rewards of skills are also pretty notable, but they didn't have anywhere near as many quests going on in Eye of the North as they did in Nightfall and Factions. And I think that's because they realized a lot of players just were not interested in doing side quests. So the side quest chains that they have and stuff are well considered and polished and feel very distinct from each other, relatively speaking. I mean, there's obviously limitations to how distinct they can be, but... and they're covering slightly different territory to kind of fill in a broader picture, rather than especially Factions, which had a lot of overlapping quests in terms of what they're talking about. You're not just like loading up on quests and then just doing them all and checking them off. You're actually doing stuff more considered. So I feel like they spent their time better in terms of what they're doing with their quests here. Okay, and then next bullet point under Eye of the North. I frankly don't know about the design of Duncan the Black. He feels unnecessarily hard, like ArenaNet was challenging players with, is this hard enough for you yet? I don't find the design particularly fun, just super gimmicky. Yep, that's my thoughts on Duncan the Black. Still, it's like, Duncan is really, really hard unless you exploit build gimmicks, which is fine to an extent, but also just feels kind of underwhelming. It's like there's a few different ways you can go about doing things with him, but the most reliable common way that I'm aware of is to swap his spirits away from him in a very long and tedious process, and then hang out with some life drain type things and like let him lose a bunch of health to spoil Victor or whatever. It's not a particularly interesting fight in my opinion. Okay, next bullet point. I do like how the Norn, Asura, and Sylvari were set up overall. Subpoint. On the other hand, I feel like Ogden's benediction, the final cutscene, takes a lot of wind out of the sails by pointing to Guild Wars 2 and the threat of the dragons. So, yeah, I feel like in terms of setting up the Asura and the Norn and the Sylvari, I like what they did with Eye of the North. I like how they were presenting the Norn culture and the way that they think about things and how they approach stuff. I like how they're doing the same with the Asura and making it very clear, like, how their society works in a very distinct sort of way with all of the subcommittees and things, but also, like, the hermit geniuses working on their own project and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the Sylvari have a little bit of setup with what's going on here, and your discussions with Ventari and things. I think that's reasonable for the stage of the game. But I don't... That transition... let's see. Okay, yeah. The next bullet point talks about other stuff. The presentation of them, I think, works overall, I think, decently well. The Ogden's benediction, though, the final cutscene takes a lot of wind out of the sails. The focus on, like, Guild Wars 2 is, like, the greatest of heroes, or the greatest of heroes, the children of the legends or whatever. Yeah, I agree. I'll talk about the Great Destroyer in a moment. And again, this is opinion stuff, right? This is things that I was noting, how they struck me, how they landed with me. It's like, if the ending of your game is basically like, this, you ain't seen nothing yet, which is kind of what it feels like the ending is supposed to be. Ogden's benediction is trying to set stuff up for transitioning to Guild Wars 2. I don't feel like Guild Wars 2 paid it off very well. Pain Inverter does a really good job of destroying the Great Destroyer, but he's not, even without that, he's not, sorry about bumping the microphone there. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, very much so agree. Very much so agree. My next point's actually on the Great Destroyer itself. I feel like the Great Destroyer, as presented in Eye of the North, doesn't align very well with the lore as presented in Sorrow's Furnace. It was clearly retconned, and it feels like no effort was made to make it fit in better. Subpoint, it also decreases the meaning of the Great Dwarf to have it set opposite the Great Destroyer instead of Primordius itself. Yeah. Exactly. In Sorrow's Furnace, it talks about the Great Destroyer and the Great Dwarf's Great War. Where's that established, Toapat? That Primordius is the Great Destroyer? Because the boss at the end is literally called the Great Destroyer, as I recall. The boss at the end of Eye of the North. Like, that's literally what its name is. One of the things that I really dislike is that Sorrow's Furnace makes a big deal about names, that the Great Destroyer will be summoned when its name is spoken aloud. And the name is recorded in the Tome of the Rubicon, but has otherwise been lost to history. And it, like, is completely non... the feeling that I get of what the Great Destroyer is in Sorrow's Furnace and what we actually got just do not mesh. And I feel like it just doesn't work very well for me at all. It's one of those things where it's like, I appreciate that they were going back to that lore and trying to do something with it, but yeah, I can see the design is somewhat similar to the aliens. I mean, I don't like the mechanical design of the destroyers at large as well. Their enormous armor pools, their ridiculously high armor combined with inner fire is just really annoying. I mean, to some extent, that's engine limitations, Toapat. But it would have been nice if we had seen them being a little bit more destructive instead of just fighty. For me, the big thing here also to take away is if you are equating things and then you take one side of the equation and you diminish it, like from my perspective, the Great Destroyer is being equated to the Great Dwarf. And then it feels like the Great Destroyer in Eye of the North is greatly diminished as an entity, and that greatly diminishes the Great Dwarf as well. And the dwarves as a whole as a result. I feel like if they wanted us to think that Primordius is the Great Destroyer, and we don't know what their engine looked like, Toapat. I'm going to call issue with that. We don't know what their engine limitations were. We don't know how much work it would have been to redo things. Keep in mind, Eye of the North was scrambled together from leftover concepts from Utopia because the team changed direction. I kept wanting to say jump ship, but they changed direction to work on Guild Wars 2. Their engine limitations were real. They were running into all sorts of problems with it. They couldn't implement an auction house because of engine issues, despite wanting to, and frankly creating the Embark Beach map in order to be able to implement one. That's my understanding of what Embark Beach was originally supposed to be. Engine limitations are a very real thing. Yes, you can eventually program your way around stuff, but the amount of time and energy and resources that can take can be extremely large. Just saying, oh, Blizzard managed to do things this other way, why couldn't ArenaNet do it? is, in my mind, not a valid argument. The engines were different, and we don't know what the limitations of the Blizzard engine looks like either, or the team or resources that they're working with. So, creating destructible environments, like, is a huge thing to do. Could ArenaNet have potentially implemented objects that were intentionally meant to be destroyed and show them in cutscenes being destroyed? Yes. They could have potentially done more with that. Again, they were working with a greatly diminished team because they were just trying to create something to be a carryover and direction from Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2, and a lot of the team changed. Their resources were greatly diminished for working on Eye of the North. So, engine limitations become even more real. And even with that, they introduced a lot of improvements to their graphical engine that allowed them to be able to do things like the Burning Forest, for example. But I want to be very careful about assuming what an internal system has available to them, and what that looks like, because we don't know. Unless you've actually worked at ArenaNet and worked on the Guild Wars 1 engine, which I don't know, maybe you have, but I would be surprised if that were the case, given everything that you've presented and said. And I certainly have not worked on it either. We simply do not know what the engine looks like and what its limitations may or may not have been. Okay, so final bullet point of things that kind of stood out to me here. The game, that is Eye of the North, is very closely linked to Prophecies. The Ebon Vanguard continue Gwen's story, as well as the story of Ascalon versus the Char. The Shining Blade are in the Asuran areas, particularly Sparkfly, and the Stone Summit and Dwarves from Sorrow's Furnace are integral to the plot. First subpoint, on the one hand, I really enjoy this, as I'm most fond of Prophecies of the 3 campaigns. Other bullet point. On the other hand, it does leave Cantha and Ilona rather undeveloped. Yes, there are nods, Zonder and Kamu, Henchi's and Magni's tournament, but the stories aren't particularly continued here. Further subpoint, to be fair, however, Prophecies is the most nuanced location with the most developed and unresolved situations, making it easier to pick up threads for. So I just like the way that it was connected. Where you can gather the Guild Wars engine is way simpler than the WoW engine. Yeah, I have no idea what the back ends look like on any of those. I don't know what the back ends look like. I don't know what things look like previously. I don't know what they look like now. I don't know what the relative team sizes working on things were. I think ArenaNet's gotten a lot bigger over the years as well. Or had it, anyway. So yeah, I overall liked the way that Prophecy stuff was picked up on. Some of it I wish could have been done a little bit more thoroughly in other areas, but... those are my notes on Eye of the North. So, that brings us to War in Kryta, of which I have just a few notes from War in Kryta. 1. Having repeated follow-up on seeds planted earlier helps make the world feel more complete and whole. So we see the early days of the Krytan Civil War and Prophecies, including Salma, and then follow up on it with Eye of the North and conclude it here. So this is something that I actually quite like. Yeah, like, there's a lot... the thing is, jumping in Guild Wars 1 would require dramatically different world design and level design, and it doesn't add anything to the game mechanically. People just like to be able to jump for some reason. It makes them feel happy, I guess. But there's no mechanical reason for jumping to be in Guild Wars 1. I do think it would be really cool if a game that has jumping in it implemented bunny hop detection, and when they detected that you were bunny hopping, that they'd start making your character... why am I blanking on the term? Skip. Start skipping. I think that'd be a really cool animation thing to do. But anyway, that's a random other thought. But yeah, so I like the idea of like, oh, we see the beginnings of the Crichton Civil War. When we get to Eye of the North, we see some continuation of that conflict, and then it'd be quite reasonable to detect. But then you're having to spend a bunch of time adding animations to jumping. Like you just determine like, is the person pushing the jump key within sort of this interval? How many times have they done it? If they've done it like, you know, close to when they land. Basically, if you jump again close to when you land and you keep doing that, you'd be in a skip animation for your jumps instead of a just the regular jumping animation. But you'd have to add it to add some additional stuff for it. It's whether or not it'd be worth it, I don't know, but it'd be kind of cool to add. So the basically this first bullet point of War and Crida is like, we see several beats happen to it, and the fact that it continues over a period of time makes it feel more substantial as a thing that's happening. Another bullet point that I have here in the War and Crida is, this is somewhat more specific to how Guild Wars 1 works, but having ways to change old areas into new ones through mob configuration, including making them properly leveled for max level characters, is a great way to breathe new life into existing maps. This is something that I think is really cool, and it would have been neat if they had done it a little bit more throughout. Hard mode obviously kind of does it, but reconfigured mobs is more interesting than just dramatically higher level with bigger health pools and improved like stats and maybe an elite added. Like actually reconfigured mobs. Both War and Crida and Winds of Change do that. I think that's really cool. And I really like that they did that. Just some like, I do wish with War and Crida that they had added an outpost down here to Dekudu Village. I think that would have helped a lot with just kind of adding some sense of stuff to the map. I feel like I've kind of like missed or gotten away from some of the like takeaways, so we might go over some stuff again for like more of a lessons learned type things rather than just a summary of observations. Winds of Change. Go ahead and just hop back over to the Assassin. Talk about Winds of Change and Winds of Change Land. Probably need the map up. Let's see. So Winds of Change. It's a good idea to try to get the player to be in the same narrative place as their avatars. This becomes a bit of an issue in Winds of Change, as ArenaNet did a very poor job of selling the whole maybe we shouldn't mercilessly wipe out the Ampha and Jade Brotherhood thing. If they had spent more time presenting them as more than just enemies to slaughter, we might be more on board with what our character starts saying. As is, it feels out of place. Likewise, some of the thoughts expressed to Shinji when guiding the protesters to Shikwing Skyway seem to come out of nowhere. It'd have been good to somehow work in some dialogue hinting towards those thoughts to foreshadow this conversation. So, basically, one of my big problems with the Winds of Change story, I actually think that the story itself, the overall framework of what they're doing with it, is really solid. But the way it's actually executed on has a lot of issues in terms of getting us, the players, into a place to agree with what our characters are saying. So our characters are taking the position that maybe we shouldn't go around wiping out the Ampha and the Jade Brotherhood. Why? Why has our character reached this conclusion? They need to bring the player to that point, to that idea, and they didn't do that. That is a big failing when you have sort of the pivot in Winds of Change from working with the Ministry of Purity to take out the Afflicted, and then they start fighting the other things, and then they were infected with the Chaos Spawn. Yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing, is the Ampha had become obsessed with the... And there's a great side quest with Zenmai that you get access to later in the narrative than you should, where Zenmai is ex-Ampha. This is a known fact. So Olias is ex-White Mantle, as are the Prophecies player characters, for that matter. Like, I feel like Guild Wars has done a traditionally very poor job of having nuance in their villains. in general, which is not a bad thing for a video game. It makes it like so that way players with higher empathy levels are not feeling too much empathy for these random groups that you're fighting. But like they ArenaNet is trying to have this idea that there's a reason to not just wipe the Ampha and the Jade Brotherhood off the face of the map in the narrative as presented to us in Winds of Change. Like, this is what our character's position becomes, but they never do the legwork to actually make us, the players, realize, wait, maybe they shouldn't just be wiped out. Yeah, they're just crime hegemonies. Exactly. They're just like, it's a mono criminal organization. If they want us, the players, to believe that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be wiping out the Ampha and the Jade Brotherhood, which we, the players, have been doing extensively throughout the game, by the way, they need to actually have, like, put in some serious quest work and legwork developing that narrative concept, and they just did not. Their focus was entirely on bringing the Ministry of Purity up, but that meant that the narrative ended up suffering because they did not do the work to make us think maybe wiping out the gangs was too far. They needed to do something with that. Like, when we spare Rice and the Phoenix in that one quest, we make the wrong move, 1,000% the wrong move. We should have taken him down. And, like, you can see that from the way things developed further on. I don't know, like, how ArenaNet should have done it, but they needed to spend some time presenting to us more thoroughly and earlier on in the narrative. Like, they needed to have, and to what you're saying here, like, in real life, gangs source first from some form of economic social hardship. They're an attempt to establish order and protection against a problem. The gangs, especially the Jade Brotherhood, you could be a little bit different with the Ampha because of the whole love for the affliction and the chalice of corruption business. But the Jade Brotherhood could have been an organization that was also working to fight the afflicted. Like, if we fought alongside members of the Jade Brotherhood that are just trying to protect their community against the afflicted earlier on, that would have done a lot to try to change their perception. And ArenaNet could have been working that sort of thing in. The Ampha are much harder to redeem intrinsically. They do like some decent stuff with that Zenmai side quest, but it is super duper optional in Winds of Change. So, and also you do not get to do it early. It comes later when your Zenmai is like, I want to save some of my friends from being wiped out by the Ministry of Purity. And it's like, okay, cool. But, like, they needed to have done a lot more legwork to make it clear that the gangs are like, yeah, they're not great people, but they're still trying to protect their people, and they don't do a good job of showing that they're trying to protect their people against the afflicted when there's because, like, part of the reason why the gangs exist is because the bureaucracy of the or at least this is my guess anyway. Like, theoretically, the gangs exist because the bureaucracy of the Celestial Ministry has gotten so, like, out of touch with real people that they're no longer able to actually effectively solve problems. And so you basically have the ineffectual government being replaced by the gangs. That's kind of what's happening, right? Theoretically, anyway. So we need to actually see that. We need to see that these are people that are trying to... that are kind of, like, forced in this situation. And they have the hints of it. They have the barest hints of it. Yeah. The Ministry of Purity would literally cause Cantha to descend into a full-fledged civil war. But, like, you get the hints of some of this stuff with, like, that Zenmai quest, for example, or Airy Heart of Fire, and some of that. But, like, it's not... It needs to be a lot stronger to actually work. And I think Winds of Change, like, its greatest narrative failing is in failing to bring the player's thought process, like, to help the player be in the same mental space as the player, as their character is supposed to be. to where we can be like, yeah, why are we wiping out the Amphar? Or like, no, not all of the Amphar are bad people. Not all of the Jade Brotherhood are bad people. Yeah, a lot of them are, but not all of them. Like, they just do not do and put in the time or the work necessary in order to be able to make that something that we, the players, think. They just have our characters spew that stuff out of nowhere. And then the whole thing about, like, what's the line between a hero and a killer? Just following righteous causes presented to us left and right. Like, there's a lot of, like, interesting stuff you could unpack with that. And there's an interesting speech that's given to Shinji when we're doing this thing with the protesters. But, like, is it really, like, where does it come from? There could have been a lot more stuff sort of foreshadowing that place and that conversation to where it feels like a natural conclusion, not like it's coming out of nowhere. Like Danica and that Lexan point of view character who doesn't exist should end the GW1 narrative as full-fledged warlords. Yeah, probably. So it's just one of those things where some of that stuff just does not land very well because they just don't do the work to build up to it. And that's something that's really important for me to remember, like, when I'm creating stuff, is, like, I want to make sure that if the characters are saying something, that the player can figure out where they came to that conclusion and kind of, like, follow along with that conclusion rather than just be like, okay, I guess this is where the story's going then. Next thing from Winds of Change, this is a positive one, though. Showing logical progressions to things in the world is also powerful. For example, Menlo becoming interim headmaster of Xingje Monastery. I really like that they did this, where, like, oh, something in the world has changed. Master Togo was the head of Xingje. He died. That's a problem. Who's going to head up Xingje? Now, should it have been Menlo? That's open for debate, but the fact that they thought about having an interim headmaster there is really cool. I mean, arguably it could have and maybe should have been somebody else other than Menlo, but one of the other headmasters, Amara or Vong or something. But regardless, like, the fact that they were thinking about that and presented that is something that I thought was really cool and I really liked. Another example of this was wiping out all of the afflicted permanently, both narratively and mechanically, is also a powerful way to communicate change. Then this is something as well that I think is really cool about the Guild Wars 1 system, where they have instanced maps, is it allows you to be able to present the world changing over time through the spawns and maps and things. And I really like that they did that, and it gives a sense that things change when things actually change. And it gives a sense that the world is changeable when things actually change. So, like, introducing mechanical changes like that is extremely powerful. Because, like, this is one of the things that I think is really, really cool about games. As I switch over back to Rex Templaris to talk about Hearts of the North. Games are very distinct as a medium because video games are an experiential medium. They are not simply like a movie or a book. Books are a little bit more, or can be a little bit more immersive, I guess is the word that people use. But games are literally an experiential medium. Now I'm just going to go to Gwen's Garden here, where when you play a video game, you are experiencing something. It is something that you're living, right? And this means that leveraging the power of mechanical stuff is, like, one of the things that games can do that is so very potent and so very powerful. And so when they're doing stuff like actually making the things that you do change your experience of doing stuff in the world, that's very strong and really cool, and I really like that. I mean, that's a good question, too. How is Shido getting the raw materials to make Shidoken? That's a good question, which I do not have an answer. What do you got here in Gwen's Garden? Okay, Hearts of the North. So just a few things here. Granting skills can help sell narrative concepts. Basically, giving Kieran Paragon shouts conveys the idea of him assuming a more powerful leadership role in a mechanical way, and that's cool. Basically, mechanically reflecting narrative changes, which is the thing I was just talking about actually, reinforces those narrative changes in a very tangible way, which is powerful. So yeah, that is something that I think is really cool. Regardless of what you think of the story of Hearts of the North, I liked the fact that it was kind of like an expanded bonus mission pack concept, and I liked the way that they use giving skills to represent changes to the character, and I think that's really, really neat. Yeah, it's definitely Hearts of the North is going to land differently for different people. I like some of what they're trying to do with it. I like that they're trying to explore the concept of like Kieran Thackeray's character in terms of it's a very subtle difference, but needing to feel needed is kind of where Kieran Thackeray is at. Like the kind of the idea that they're presenting is personality-wise, Kieran Thackeray is somebody who needs to feel needed. He needs to feel important and that he matters in a sort of very dependent way. And they move him to being somebody that people rely on, not because he needs them to have to rely on him, but because he is actually doing, like, it's more of a heart attitude thing than it is an actual change in what he's doing behaviorally, but it's a significant difference, and it's a much stronger place where he ends up at the end of his time with Miku. And I actually like what they're doing with some of that exploration of character, where Kieran is going from, and I'm having to kind of work on memory because it's been a little bit at this point since I've played through the Hearts of the North stuff. But which is why I'm looking up at the corner. Up there's where I keep my thoughts. But Kieran is going from a place of where he's not a strong leader because of who he is, but because he's that's how he feels valuable. It's a dependent sort of relationship, and then he transitions to a place where other people are following him as a leader because he's I don't have the right words to express this. I don't have the right language to express this concept. To where it's his ability to be charismatic, I guess, basically. We're going to have differing opinions on this, Toapat. And, like, the point is whether or not you feel that he is a good leader or not. It is that they are trying to present the idea that he needed to change to become a more independent and a more full person. Frankly, Rurik is not a very good leader, in my opinion. Like, Rurik is a really interesting case study because we're so enmeshed. And this is something else that I realized would be really interesting to talk about at some point, so I might as well insert it here. One of the things that ArenaNet fell into is I need to back up. I mean, basically, I was going to say they fall into their own propaganda. Is basically what happens. Yeah. Like, so King Adelburn. This is one of those weird, like, subtle things. We are part of the Prince's Vanguard, and what that means is that we're predominantly presented as the viewpoint of the Prince's Vanguard and the viewpoint of the Prince. So, like, if you look at the end of Fort Rannoch, I think it is, where he's, like, wanting to take the fight to the Char and stuff, it's overall, like, emphasized that you have basically two schools of thought going on here. The king wants to weather the Char and hold the line with the wall, use the wall as a defensive mechanism. The prince wants to push out and take the fight to the Char. And what ends up happening is the breach right here. This breach in the line is created by Duke Barradin pushing into Pick and Square. And so, I mean, I still have kind of a point that I'm going to expand on here. Yeah, the game favors Rurik's point of view, absolutely. And it favors the point of view of Rurik's vanguard. Because what we have is we have 2 military factions, maybe 3. Well, is Duke Barradin part of Rurik's vanguard? I'm not 100% sure on that at the moment. But it basically has the... is he's the only character who has the first and most critical trait of leadership, the ability to make decisions. What about Evenia? What about Captain Lingmar? As just a couple of individuals. But anyway, to kind of elaborate on this thing with King Adelbern, where we get glimpses of King Adelbern's position primarily through War Master Titus, and some of the quests there. But the basic gist here is the break in Ascalon's line is caused by Duke Barradin going out of position. And what we see with this is that, like, Rurik's vanguard is taking a position where the King's Guard, the King's branch of the military, is cowardly. That they are unwilling to go out and fight, whereas the King's Guard's position is that the Rurik's vanguard is being brash and is being reckless and is failing to follow the overall process, which is to hold the line against the Char. Because, like, the Char are predominantly not south of the wall. They're primarily north of the wall. There are some around Fort Rannoch and whatnot. But the idea is that the wall is overall doing a successful job of holding the Char back from the southern territories here. Except what's happened then is Duke Barradin's made a breach. And then Rurik basically comes along and drags, like, a huge chunk of the Ascalonian population away, which further weakens things. However, like, if you look at the Last Day Dawn's mission, it has dialogue from King Adelbern that basically presents himself as being somewhat regretful of the decisions he made in Alani Academy at the end in Rin. I have no idea why Rin's not an outpost, by the way. So it's just one of those things where, because we're presented Rurik's point of view more than the King's, what's ended up happening over time is the King has been made, like, his motivations, his thinking has gotten kind of squashed down into kind of a caricature, I think, where what's happened is some of the subtlety and nuance goes away. So if you look at the end of Prophecies, he goes, like, the special ending that they, or the ending area that they added to the team arena's outpost over here. And his dialogue there is much more two-dimensional. It's just like, cool, I don't care about anything other than killing the Char and Ascalon. That's who they made him into, and that's not exactly where he was at the start or at the Dragon quests. And I feel like over time, the writers at ArenaNet, and I feel like there had to have been some serious changes over time to the writing staff and what their understanding of the plot was, because I think that their continuity department is apparently utter garbage, is what I've heard, and that they rely on, like, fan-made resources for trying to understand what their own continuity is, and I don't know why they don't have internal continuity documents. But it shows in Prophecies, where King Adelbern is a prime example of this, where he goes from, like, we're trying to hold the line, Duke Barradin is threatening our position by breaking formation. We can't trust the Crichtons from old stuff, which is understandable where he's coming from. We can't trust the Crichtons. And then Rurik is like, oh, who cares about holding formation? We need to fight the Char. We need to take the fight to them, sort of thing. Yeah, exactly. He's a defeatist. He feels like the Char are indefeatable. They can't be stopped. And so he ends up basically making that true by basically massively fracturing the Ascalonian army. Instead of being a unified nation, they're broken up into those who chose to remain with King Adelbern and then those who went over Borlus Pass. But even when you're doing the Last 8 Dawns where you're fighting the Titans, King Adelbern just sounds like a weary man who has had to live with the regret of what happened to Rurik. Like, he knows Rurik died in his effort, and he thinks Rurik would have been proud of what you've done to try to do things. And the feeling that I get from him there is a tired old man who's burdened down with regrets. What he's become by the time ArenaNet made this ending area, which, keep in mind, was much after they added the Dragon Quests, is a man whose entire personality has been reduced to pro-Ascalon, hate the Char. And then that is just who he is going forward with the Foe Fire. So, like, Adelbern's character, like, gets squashed into an absolute caricature of who he is. And I think that's interesting, and I think it's a consequence of being presented a point of view that is so entrenched in Rurik's, like, framing of what's going on, where he thinks the king is foolish and cowardly. And the king's like, our best chance of defeating the Char is to protect our line and keep them from being able to, like, go after our civilians and stuff. There could have been a very different approach to everything. That would have been interesting to see. But anyway, that's kind of rambling off that point. The other final note that I had on Hearts of the North is that having stuff that's a change of pace like Hearts of the North primarily is nice to have. So just where it works like the bonus mission pack, it's nice to have things that kind of do things a little bit differently mechanically. And that's kind of nice. Then I had a couple of general thoughts. So, general thoughts, there's two main bullet points here. The first one is that having festivals is really cool. Predictable events that change how things go are neat, though certainly not a fit for every game. Still, keep the idea in mind for games where they could work. So I really like having festivals change things around. And it's something that I want to consider if it can work in single-player games to have festivals and to have them... Because having festivals are an important thing in the real world, so having them in a game and having them kind of expressed in a culture in a game is actually something that's really cool if you can set it up. The wall is really friggin' big. I mean, it's a good question with the Siege Devourers. That is a really good question. It does look kind of like the Siege Devourers are maybe using similar technology to the Searing Crystals, because the Char explosives are kind of sharded. Like, they have shards poking out of them. But that's a really good question. Like, if the Char have Siege Devourers, why don't we see any of them in Prophecies? They would have been really good. I don't know. That's a real good question. I feel like the Char in Eye of the North, as much as I like seeing things come back with them, I feel like the Char were not handled super well in that regard. Even though I think they're the most interesting enemies to fight in Eye of the North. And then just some... yeah, that's exactly it, Clean Star. So, a final thought. is that something all of Guild Wars Beyond does is help make the world feel more connected by introducing characters that travel to each area, such as Miku, but also by implying trade between areas. The Hay Fever tea in the post A Good Deed conversations, for example, where it's like, oh, this is using resources from around the world in order to make this tea. That's really cool. I really like that. And then technically the 5, Devona, Menlo, Aiden, Sin, and Eve, do this too, as does Eye of the North by bringing additional characters back in numerous places. For example, Henchman, Magni the Bison's Tournament. Still, I like what it does for the world. So those were some of my... Or those are the enormous list of observations. I think for some of the major lessons that I personally, like, as a game designer, developer, want to draw from this, I think one of the first ones is being very intentional with how I'm setting up tutorials. This is in no particular order of importance, by the way, but being very intentional with how I'm setting up tutorial stuff in order to be able to present them in useful ways that actually can help. The things that I'm thinking of here are, in particular, the way that quests are used for tutorials in Nightfall in order to do tutorials, as well as the arrangement of the tutorials with Tropic Village and all of that. But also, like, Kryta not having the Signet of Capture in an area where you can get elite skills is kind of a tutorial failure. Where if they're trying to teach you what the purpose of Signets of Captures are and how they work, they need to have placed elite skills there so you could actually capture them. I think probably the single biggest takeaway for me from, like, all of this observation stuff is the importance or power of mechanics in terms of world storytelling. Yeah, you can capture non-elite skills, but that's not... It doesn't really give you a sense of why capturing exists in the game. So, like, but this mechanical thing is really significant in terms of sort of its reach. So the fact that we don't have as much development of the world by having fewer quests in Kryta, the arrangement of the world is very mechanically... Like, mechanics are just so incredibly important. And this does this thinking through what Guild Wars 1 does really highlights it in areas where they both succeed and fail. So, like, pre-searing to post-searing is a really good example of mechanics incredibly powerfully telling the story, because mechanics are a primary means through which the player's experience of the story unfolds. It's important to have those kind of married together and working well, where your mechanics are reinforcing your claims about the world. So, like, if Temple of the Age is connected to Watchtower Coast, for example, it would make, like, this is just a simple one, but it would make Kryta feel a lot more unified. If there had been more towns and outposts throughout Kryta, it would have made it feel more developed and more of a place. The fact that we have so few active towns, just like some few settlements here and there, but almost nothing west of Beetleton, especially, like, there's some stuff in Divinity Coast, but it's locked in missions. The fact that there's so little development out this way also contributes to that feel of, like, Kryta, it doesn't feel like a big, significant nation. It does not feel like the equal to what Ascalon was, because Ascalon's ruins imply a lot of stuff. But also, like, the lack of quests and the positioning of quests matters for, like, what's going on with the narrative. But also that quests should be used thoughtfully. I don't know. There's just a lot of different things going on with this sort of idea. Another really important one is the power of implication and the danger of sort of what I'm going to call the lore uncanny valley, where and this is a really important one for me because I care about world building a lot. It's actually, this is something Dark Souls does masterfully, is Dark Souls implies a lot about the lore but it's very careful about how much like information it gives, because if you give too much information, you rob space for speculation that can end up being very powerful drivers of engagement with the lore, but you also run the risk of making things very shallow. So if you're going to try to explain something, you need to explain it deeply. Otherwise, it should probably be left at implication levels. This is something for me to really consider and think, because I do want to, like, as a designer, Dark Souls, from a lore standpoint, is a huge inspiration to me. And I want to do stuff kind of like it, but, I mean, that takes a lot of stuff as well. Yeah, but there's a reason why there's multiple YouTube channels dedicated to the lore. Like, Vadi Vidya is probably the best known one. Hawkshaw is probably the most in-depth one that I've seen. Just exploring, like, the implications from environmental design and things. And being able to trust sort of the deliberateness of what the designer was doing with building their world is very significant. But in terms of like implications, there's mechanical implications as well, with sort of this idea of frayed edges. This is one that also stands out to me a lot. I know that I want to be, with things that I make, I want to be careful about how I'm presenting the world, because I'm probably going to make single player stuff, not MMOs. I don't know why I'm looping around these, but with the way that collector weapons work, where it's like, oh, these are kind of interesting things. I don't like. I have a general idea of what these sorts of things are, but I don't 100% know what they might end up being, sort of thing. And some of that is really neat, and as well as implications with the environment design and things like that. What was this place and things, as well as like when things seem too shallow with the way Shiro and Varish and getting my brain off track. Shiro, Varish, the Stone Summit, those things are kind of presented a bit shallowly. So it's like there's this uncanny valley in the lore where it's like, oh, that's all, and then actually go deeper. I have no idea. This is something. So if you watch the slow playthrough, I actually straight up rejected the Great Northern Wall dumping me in Fort Rannoch, and I went from Ascalon City and made my way to Fort Rannoch. I think they just didn't make enough primary quests, is the short answer to that question. Like, I understand why Fort Rannoch drops you off at the Frontier Gate, because literally that's where the Fort Rannoch mission ends. Ruins of Sturmia literally teleports you to Nolani Academy, but then there's no reason why Nolani Academy should teleport you to Yak's Bend. That makes no sense. There's no reason why the Great Northern Wall should jump you off at Fort Rannoch. And there's zero reason why Divinity Coast should dump you off and Druid's Overlook. That makes no sense either. So if you actually go and watch the slow playthrough, some of those particularly nonsensical teleports, I straight up reject and actually make my way there properly. Some of them make sense, but a lot of them don't. All right, there's quite a few that don't. Let's see. What are some others? I feel like I had some stuff that was in my brain that then got sidetracked, which is the danger of doing this live, but that's okay. Oh yeah. The other thing is just like, if you're telling a story, you should really make sure you're setting it up properly and using tools like foreshadowing, and understanding how the pieces are all, like why the pieces are all there and how they all fit together. And then this has kind of a corollary, which is if your story hinges on a character, like a singular character, the lore on Kenny Valley is particularly dangerous, because either you need to have them be kind of a black box where the player doesn't really know what's going on with them, but it's really hard to do if you're putting on a single character, or you really need to be able to get in depth to make them relatable, if that's something that you're actually trying to do, and understandable. Because, like, if they're supposed to be the hero of their own story, which is what villains are, we need to understand how they frame themselves. even if we ultimately disagree with them and their decisions. I think that's some of the major takeaways. There's other stuff too, mechanically speaking, that I got from other things that I've done in the past. So, for some of the stuff about builds and stuff, you can check out. I did a whole series where I was reviewing all of the skills in the game, not the rework project, which was similar, but a thing previous to that, which I had some thoughts and conclusions at the end of that enormous endeavor. I would, by the way, change a number of my skill evaluations since then, but there are a lot of more mechanically inclined things from that standpoint, if you want to look there. Let's see, can we see them from here? No. They just give us barren wasteland over there. Good job, Arena. If you actually go out into this zone, though, you can actually see the walls of Fort Rannoch from there. Fort Rannoch has large walls, that's why. The fact that Guild Wars 1 doesn't really do interiors is a detriment to some of that stuff, I think. Does anybody have any questions or anything about some of that stuff? I'm probably going to be wrapping up shortly here to switch over to Axiom Verge, because I feel like I've kind of discussed all that I really wanted to or needed to. From this. There'll be stuff like, now that I've reviewed things, kind of boiling in the back of my brain, so I might bring it up again in future streams. That's Fort Rannoch right there. That's the sort of the backside of it. So that's probably why it's a fortress. It's actually pretty impressive. But yeah, I'm looking due south at Fort Rannoch. A little worse for wear. Some of that annoying pop in and out issue. I wish their culling algorithm was better, but... yeah, I imagine Fort Rannoch is one of the older establishments. Does it actually say? Let's see. Fort Rannoch was a facility used by the Ascalon military to train new soldiers and fight in the Guild Wars. When the wars ended, the fort itself, like most other buildings in Ascalon, had been almost completely destroyed. All that remains are the outer walls and memories of what once was. I don't know. What do you think? This is the wall that we were looking at. That's the side of that one burnt out building. I think it was just a much more significant structure at one point in time that lost importance and has kind of fallen into neglect. These seem like pretty substantial walls going on here. Like, it's even got a moat and drawbridge. Like, I don't know if the idea of it being a fort is what you're talking about. The crap? Do we have actual water here? Well, now we know where everybody gets their water in Ascalon. And a lot of it might be some earth movement over time and such as well. Yeah, I see what you're saying with the hills up there. I think that's in part the way that they did the maps for segregating regions. I think that has more to do with map design than Fort Rannoch design, if that makes sense. Because they're segregating the world with cliffs and stuff. It's one of those things that's really tricky because of draw distances and things, and you can't have infinitely sized maps and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, I think that's most of what I wanted to... Like I said, I think that's most of what I wanted to discuss. I'm going to go ahead and cut this here, just that way I have these thoughts all in one spot. So I'm going to be switching over to Axiom Verge. I'm happy to have done this, though, and to have gone over these things. Would people be interested in me posting a link to this in the Discord? Because I could do that. People want to review it themselves. And again, these are just my observations, the things that kind of stuck out to me. And like as a game designer, as any sort of creative, when you have something that you love and you find yourself wanting to kind of replicate it, it's really important to understand why the thing worked and what it was doing that you actually connected with, rather than trying to just superficially copy, because that's where you end up getting things not working. It's really easy to focus on the superficial elements of why it worked and what you think happened, and kind of miss the core of why it worked, if that basically makes sense. But yeah, with that, I am going to go ahead and wrap up this portion of the stream. Oh, this character had his birthday today. Let's open this gift. It is, after all, his birthday. What did he get? A miniature Hydra. Appropriate for an elementalist. Mini pets. Taking up space. Taking up space. All right, well, I will see you all, hopefully, in just a few minutes. I'm going to take a short break, switch over to Axiom Verge, where I will conclude the stream. But if not, I will be actually playing the game again tomorrow and continuing stuff on. But this seemed like a special thing to do. I think this sort of structure works, so I might do something like this for Dark Souls 1 and 3 in the future as well. Probably when I finish Axiom Verge. Or more accurately, after I've gotten a list of bullet point notes written up like I've done with that. But until next time, everyone, thank you for watching this, and please stick around for Axiom Verge. See you in a few minutes.